Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. It was pouring rain the night my car broke down. I was driving back from my sister's house, taking the long way home because I didn't want to deal with the main road traffic. It had been raining on and off all day, and the weather just seemed to get worse as the night went on. It was one of those nights where the rain feels heavy, like it's weighing everything down. I remember the windshield wipers working overtime, barely keeping up with how fast the rain was falling. I was in the middle of nowhere, one of those long stretches of road where you don't see any houses or signs for miles. It was dark, really dark. No streetlights, no other cars around, just my headlights cutting through the rain. I wasn't speeding or anything, but suddenly, my car started making this strange noise, like a grinding sound. I slowed down, hoping it would stop, but then the engine cut off completely. Just like that, the car died. I coasted to the side of the road and sat there for a minute, trying to figure out what to do. My heart was pounding. I was stuck in the middle of nowhere, in the rain, with no idea what was wrong with my car. I tried turning the key in the ignition again, but it wouldn't start. Nothing. Not even a click. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but of course, there was no signal. No bars, no service, just a no-signal message mocking me from the screen. I told myself to stay calm. I thought maybe I'd just wait for a bit, hope someone would pass by. Surely someone would come along eventually, right? I locked the doors and sat there, watching the rain hammer down on the windshield. Minutes turned into an hour, then 2. The rain didn't let up. The road stayed empty. I could feel the panic starting to creep in, but I kept telling myself it would be fine. I turned off the headlights to save the battery and just sat in the dark. The sound of the rain was deafening, pounding against the roof of the car, and there were moments where I swore I heard something else, something moving out there in the dark. I tried not to think about it. It was probably around the 3rd hour when I finally saw headlights coming from behind me. I remember feeling a huge wave of relief. I sat up straighter, hoping whoever it was would stop. As the lights got closer, I could see it was a big truck. One of those old, beat-up ones, with the engine rumbling loud even over the rain. The truck slowed down as it passed my car, then stopped a few feet ahead. My heart was racing again, but this time from a mix of relief and nerves. I wasn't sure what kind of person would stop for a stranded woman in the middle of nowhere in the rain. But at that point, I didn't have much of a choice. I saw the driver's door open, and a man stepped out. He was tall, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face, and a dark jacket. He stood there for a moment, looking at my car through the rain before walking over. I cracked my window just a bit, enough to talk but not too wide. I didn't want to let the rain in, but also, something about him made me hesitate. "Car trouble?" he asked, leaning down a little to peer inside. "Yeah, it just died on me a few hours ago," I replied, trying to sound calm. "I've been waiting for someone to pass by." He looked around, scanning the empty road, then back at me. "No service out here, huh?" I shook my head. "None." He was quiet for a moment, then smiled a little too wide, showing a bit too many teeth. "Lucky I came by then," he said, his voice too casual. "Not a lot of people take this road at night, especially in weather like this." I nodded, hoping he would just offer to call someone for me. But instead, he stepped closer to the window, glancing inside the car. "You alone out here?" I felt a chill run down my spine. Something about the way he asked made me uncomfortable. "Yeah, but my husband knows I'm stuck," I lied. He's on his way. The man didn't seem convinced. He smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. In this weather? Gonna take him a while to get here. I didn't know what to say. I just wanted him to leave, or at least call for help and go. But he wasn't moving. He kept staring at me, his eyes lingering on me a little too long, making me feel like I was trapped in my own car. The rain kept pouring, making the silence between us even more unsettling. Mind if I take a look under the hood? He asked suddenly, stepping back and motioning toward the front of the car. I hesitated, but I didn't want to seem rude or scared. Sure, I said, popping the hood. He walked around to the front of the car, and I watched as he fiddled with something under the hood. But after a few minutes, he came back to the window, shaking his head. Looks like your battery's dead, he said, but there was something off about his tone. I can give you a jump, but you'll probably need a tow. I nodded, trying to stay calm. That would be great, thanks. He walked back to his truck, and I watched him through the rearview mirror. My heart was racing again, and my hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel. Something about this didn't feel right. I didn't trust him. He took his time getting the cables, moving slower than he needed to. When he finally came back and hooked them up, he leaned into my window again, closer this time. You know, it's dangerous for a woman to be out here alone. You never know who might come by. His words sent a wave of fear through me, but I forced a smile. Yeah, well, I'm lucky you stopped. He smiled again, that same unsettling grin. Yeah, lucky. He got back into his truck and revved the engine to charge my battery. After a few minutes, my car sputtered to life. Relief washed over me, but it didn't last long. As I thanked him, he leaned in one last time. Maybe you should let me follow you, just in case something happens again. I shook my head quickly. No, that's okay. My husband's almost here. Thanks for the help. His smile faded for a second, but then it returned, colder this time. All right, suit yourself. I didn't wait for him to say anything else. I pulled away as fast as I could, not caring if I was driving too fast for the rain. My heart was pounding in my chest the entire time, and I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see his truck following me. But thankfully, it wasn't. I didn't slow down until I was back on a well-lit, populated road. I still don't know what that man wanted, but the way he looked at me, the way he kept asking about me being alone, I don't think he stopped just to help. It was raining hard, so hard that I could barely hear the TV over the sound of the downpour hitting the windows. It was one of those nights where you're glad to be inside, dry and warm, just waiting out the storm. I remember the house feeling almost too quiet, like the storm was blocking out everything else. It had been raining for hours, non-stop, and the streets were practically flooded. I'd shut off most of the lights, leaving only the living room lamp on, casting this dull yellow glow over everything. I was sitting on the couch, half watching some show, not really paying attention, when there was a knock at the door. It wasn't a polite, light knock. It was loud, frantic, almost desperate, like someone was banging with both fists. I froze for a second, just staring at the door. It was late, maybe close to midnight, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I'm not really the type to get visitors, especially not during a storm like that. The knocking didn't stop, and then I heard a voice, muffled but high-pitched, clearly a woman's. Please. I need help. Please, let me in. I got up, heart already racing, and walked to the door. I looked through the peephole and saw her, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face. She was wearing a thin jacket that was completely drenched, and she kept glancing behind her like she was scared of something. "Please," she yelled again, her voice breaking. "My car broke down, and I don't have a phone. I need to call someone. Please." I hesitated. Everything about her screamed urgency, but something in the back of my mind didn't sit right. It wasn't just the fact that she was out in the middle of nowhere, banging on a stranger's door at midnight. There was something else, something in her eyes. She didn't look scared, exactly. She looked off. Like there was more going on than she was saying. Still, it was raining hard, and she looked miserable. I unlocked the door but only opened it a crack, just enough to talk through. "Are you all right?" I asked. She nodded quickly, wiping water from her face. "My car, it broke down a few miles back. I've been walking for what feels like hours. I don't have a phone on me. I left it in the car, and I need to call someone. Can I come in? Please." I should have said no. Looking back, I don't know why I didn't. Something about her story didn't feel right. A few miles in this storm? No phone? But she looked so desperate, and I guess I felt bad. I stepped back and opened the door for her. She rushed inside without another word, dripping water all over the floor. I grabbed a towel from the hallway and handed it to her. She barely thanked me, just started drying herself off while glancing around the house like she was checking for something. I stood there, awkwardly watching, trying to think of what to do next. "I'll grab the phone," I said, more to fill the silence than anything. "You can make a call." She nodded, but didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on the front door, like she was listening for something outside. I went to grab the phone from the kitchen and came back, handing it to her. She took it, but didn't dial right away. She just stared at it for a moment, like she wasn't sure what to do. "Who do you need to call?" I asked, starting to feel uneasy again. She was acting strange, like she wasn't in a rush anymore. "My friend," she said, her voice flat now, different from before. "I just need to call my friend to come get me." She didn't say anything else for a few seconds, just held the phone in her hand. Then, slowly, she started punching in numbers, but she was looking at me while she did it. I couldn't explain it, but the way she looked at me made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I could feel my heart starting to pound, and suddenly I realized how quiet the house had gotten again. The rain was still beating down outside, but inside, it felt suffocating. "Is everything all right?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but I was on edge now. She gave me this strange smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah," she said, her voice almost monotone now. "Everything's fine." She put the phone to her ear, but I didn't hear any ringing. She wasn't actually calling anyone. She just stood there, pretending to listen, her eyes darting to the door again. My gut twisted. Something was very wrong. "Do you need me to call someone for you?" I offered, trying to figure out how to get her out of my house without causing a scene. My voice was shaky now, betraying the fear I was feeling. She didn't respond. She just kept holding the phone to her ear, her lips twitching into that weird smile again. I took a step back, suddenly feeling trapped in my own home. "I think you should go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If your friend isn't answering, I can take you back to your car." That's when she lowered the phone, and for the first time, she looked angry. Like really angry. Her whole face changed, and she took a step toward me. "Why are you trying to get rid of me?" she asked, her voice harsh now, nothing like the desperate woman from earlier. I took another step back, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm not. I just think." I think maybe it's best if you go. She didn't move. Just stared at me, that smile gone, replaced with something colder. You're lying, she said quietly, but there was venom in her words. Before I could say anything else, there was another knock at the door. This time, it was loud, like someone was pounding on it. My blood ran cold. I hadn't heard anyone pull up, hadn't heard any footsteps on the porch. The woman didn't react, didn't flinch. She just stared at me, that angry look still on her face. Who's at the door? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She smiled again, but it was worse this time. Why don't you open it and find out? I shook my head, panic setting in now. I'm not opening that door. She shrugged, like she didn't care. Suit yourself. The pounding on the door continued, louder now, more frantic. I backed up further, putting more distance between me and the woman. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't want to turn my back on her. I felt trapped. The pounding stopped. Silence. Then, a voice from the other side of the door. Open up. It was a man's voice, deep, commanding. The woman smiled wider. Who's that? I demanded, my voice shaking. Her smile never wavered. Just a friend. I took another step back, my mind screaming at me to run, but my feet felt frozen. I couldn't let her see how scared I was, but I knew I had to get her out of my house. I had to get them both away from me. I'm calling the police, I said, pulling out my phone. I didn't wait for a reaction. I dialed the number and pressed the phone to my ear. She didn't move. She just stood there, watching me, that smile still plastered on her face. The phone rang once, twice, then I heard the operator's voice. 911, what's your emergency? I took a deep breath, ready to explain, but before I could say anything, the woman lunged at me. I stumbled backward, dropping the phone, and she grabbed me by the arm, her fingers digging into my skin. She was stronger than she looked, and I could feel the panic rising in my throat as I struggled to break free. The pounding on the door started again, louder than before. Open up, the man's voice shouted. I kicked out, managing to push her away just long enough to grab my phone off the floor. I ran into the kitchen, slamming the door behind me, locking it. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the phone. They're trying to break in, I whispered into the phone. Please, send someone, they're trying to break in. The operator was calm, asking for my address, but I couldn't focus. I could hear the woman on the other side of the door, scratching at it, laughing softly to herself. The pounding at the front door continued, but I could hear footsteps now, moving around the house, heading toward the back. I wasn't sure how long I stayed in that kitchen, waiting for the police to arrive. It felt like hours, but it was probably only a few minutes. The pounding eventually stopped, and the woman's laughter faded into silence. When the police finally arrived, they found no one. The woman, the man, they were gone. There were no footprints outside, nothing to suggest anyone had been there at all. But I know what I heard, what I saw. I haven't stayed at that house since. I couldn't. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face, hear that pounding on the door, and feel her fingers digging into my arm. I was driving home that night, late, probably around 11, maybe closer to midnight. The storm had been going for hours, a relentless downpour that made it hard to see more than a few feet in front of me. The windshield wipers were struggling, squeaking against the glass, but barely making a difference. The headlights lit up the road, but everything beyond was just a blur of rain and darkness. It was one of those nights where you just want to get home, lock the door, and forget the world outside. I wasn't even supposed to be out that late. I had stayed longer than I wanted at my brother's house, and the weather had just gotten worse. The highway was practically deserted, everyone else smart enough to stay off the roads. I felt like I was the only person out there, driving through a tunnel of rain. I was about 20 minutes from home, the road curving through a stretch of woods, when I saw him. Just a figure on the side of the road, walking in the rain. I barely noticed at first, just a shadowy shape in my peripheral vision, but as I passed, I saw him more clearly. A man, soaked to the bone, wearing a dark jacket with the hood pulled up. He was walking with his head down, his arms crossed over his chest like he was freezing. I don't know what made me slow down. I don't usually pick up hitchhikers, and especially not in the middle of the night. But something about seeing him out there in the storm, completely alone, made me feel bad for him. The rain was coming down hard, and he looked miserable. I told myself it was just a quick ride, just to get him out of the storm. He was probably headed somewhere close. So, against my better judgment, I pulled over a little ahead of him and rolled down the window. He looked up when he saw my car stop and started walking toward me. Even through the rain, I could see his face pale, tired, probably in his mid-30s, maybe older. His clothes were soaked, hanging heavy on his frame. Need a ride? I called out, trying to sound casual. He nodded, his lips pressed together, not saying a word, and he climbed into the passenger seat. The moment he shut the door, the smell of wet clothes and something else, something like dirt or sweat, hit me. I ignored it, figuring it was just the rain. He didn't say anything for the first minute or so, just sat there, staring ahead, his hands gripping his knees. I could hear the rain pounding on the roof, the wipers swishing back and forth. The car felt small all of a sudden, the space between us filled with this thick, uncomfortable silence. "Where are you headed?" I finally asked, trying to break the tension. He turned his head slowly to look at me, his face still mostly hidden by the hood. "Wherever you're going," he said, his voice low, almost too soft to hear. That answer didn't sit right with me. It was vague, like he didn't actually have a destination. But I didn't want to push it, so I just nodded and kept driving. I figured I'd drop him off at the next gas station or somewhere public. For a few more minutes, we drove in silence. The rain wasn't letting up, and the roads were getting worse, puddles forming everywhere, making the car swerve a little every now and then. I kept glancing at him out of the corner of my eye, trying to get a read on him. He wasn't doing anything weird, just sitting there, but there was something about him that made me feel uneasy. "Crazy weather, huh?" I said, just to fill the silence. He didn't respond right away. Then, after a moment, he let out this low chuckle. "Storms bring out the worst in people," he said, more to himself than to me. I didn't know how to respond to that. I just nodded again, gripping the wheel a little tighter. I started to think I had made a mistake picking him up. There was something about his tone, the way he said it, that sent a chill down my spine. He shifted in his seat, turning a little to face me. I could feel his eyes on me, even though I was focused on the road. "You ever think about what people are capable of?" he asked, his voice still low but more direct now. I didn't like where the conversation was going. "What do you mean?" I asked, keeping my eyes straight ahead. He leaned back in the seat, crossing his arms. "In situations like this," he said, almost casually. "Middle of the night. Nobody else around. What someone might do, if they thought they could get away with it." My stomach dropped. I kept my face neutral, but my heart was pounding. I didn't say anything, hoping he'd drop it, but he didn't. "You ever wonder he continued. What it'd be like to just take something you wanted. Not worry about the consequences. Not worry about getting caught. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. I don't know, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I guess I don't think about stuff like that. He chuckled again, but there was no humor in it. Most people don't. But everyone's got that side in them. It's just a matter of the right moment. I wanted to pull over, to tell him to get out, but I didn't know how he'd react. We were still in the middle of nowhere, no lights, no other cars, just the rain and the trees. I could feel the tension in the car, thick and heavy, pressing down on me. I forced myself to laugh, though it came out shaky. I think you've been out in the rain too long, I said, trying to make light of it. He didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. He just stared at me, his face shadowed by the hood. Maybe, he said softly. I kept driving, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles were white. Every instinct in me was screaming to get away from this guy, to get him out of my car. I could feel my heart racing, my pulse in my ears. The road was slick, the rain pounding harder, and the wipers barely keeping up. I didn't know where to go, but I knew I couldn't keep driving like this. Then, without warning, he reached over and turned off the radio. The sudden silence was deafening, and I could feel my breath catch in my throat. Why'd you stop the music? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual, but it came out shaky. He shrugged, leaning back in his seat again. It's distracting, he said, his voice almost a whisper. I nodded, not knowing what else to say. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I could see the lights of a gas station up ahead, faint through the rain, and I made up my mind to stop there. I'd tell him I needed gas, and maybe he'd get out. Maybe I could find a way to lose him. As we got closer, he sat up a little straighter, like he knew what I was planning. You don't need gas, he said, his voice cold now. My stomach twisted. Yeah, I do, I lied, my voice trembling. I'm running low. He shook his head slowly. No, you're not. I didn't know how he knew, but he was right. I wasn't low on gas. My mind raced, and I felt trapped, my pulse pounding in my ears. I didn't know what this guy wanted, but I knew I needed to get away from him, fast. As I pulled into the gas station, I forced a smile. I'll just be a minute, I said, trying to sound casual. He didn't move, just watched me with those cold, dark eyes. Don't take too long, he said, his voice low, almost threatening. I nodded and got out of the car, the rain hitting me like a wall. I walked quickly toward the gas station, my heart racing, my hands shaking. I glanced back and saw him watching me through the window, his face expressionless. Inside, I told the guy behind the counter that something was wrong, that I needed help. He looked at me like I was crazy at first, but when he saw the panic in my eyes, he nodded and called the police. I stayed inside, watching the rain pour down outside, watching that man sit in my car, waiting. But when the police arrived, he was gone. Just vanished into the storm. They searched the area, but they didn't find him. No sign of him anywhere. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but I know I'll never forget the way he looked at me, the way he talked about what people are capable of. I think about it every time I drive at night now. It was already dark when I pulled off the highway. The rain was coming down in sheets, heavy and loud against the roof of the car, and I could barely see through the windshield. The wipers were on full speed, but they didn't help much. I'd been driving for hours, and every sign I passed for a motel was either too far off the road or too expensive. I didn't want to keep going, not with the storm getting worse and my eyes starting to burn from staring at the road for so long. The place I stopped at wasn't much to look at. The neon sign flickered, a few letters missing, and the parking lot was mostly empty except for a couple of old cars parked near the office. It looked like the kind of place you wouldn't choose unless you had no other options, and right then, I didn't have any other options. I pulled up near the office, grabbed my bag, and hurried through the rain to the door. The inside wasn't much better, dim lighting, a musty smell, and a single fan rattling in the corner behind the desk. The guy sitting there looked up when I walked in, wiping his nose on the back of his hand before giving me a half smile. He was an older man, greasy hair and skin that looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in years. "You need a room?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Just for the night," I said, already regretting my decision but too tired to turn back now. He slid a worn-out register book across the counter. "Cash only," he added, like I should have expected that. I didn't have much cash on me, but enough for the night. I scribbled my name in the book and handed over the money, not looking at him too closely because something about him made me uneasy. He handed me a key attached to a large plastic tag with the number 12 written on it in faded marker. "Rooms around the back," he said, pointing in the direction of the door. I nodded, grabbed the key, and headed back outside into the rain. The storm had picked up, wind blowing the rain sideways, soaking me before I even made it to the room. The motel was shaped like an L, and my room was in the far corner, away from the office. As I approached, I noticed that the light above my door was flickering, casting the hallway in and out of darkness. I unlocked the door, pushed it open, and stepped inside. The room was exactly what I expected, small, with dingy wallpaper peeling at the edges, a bed that looked like it had been there for decades, and a small TV on a dresser. The smell of mildew hit me as soon as I walked in, and the carpet squished under my shoes like it had never fully dried. I dropped my bag on the bed, kicked off my shoes, and collapsed onto the mattress. It wasn't comfortable, but at that point, I didn't care. The rain pounded against the window, the wind howling outside, making the place feel even more isolated. I sat up and turned on the TV, hoping for some background noise to drown out the storm, but all I got was static on every channel. With a sigh, I turned it off and lay back on the bed, trying to ignore the creeping feeling that I should have just kept driving. It was probably an hour later when I first heard the noises. At first, I thought it was just the wind, maybe something banging against the side of the building, but it didn't sound right. It was rhythmic, like a dull thud, over and over, coming from the room next to mine. I figured it was just someone else staying at the motel, maybe dropping something or moving furniture, but it didn't stop. I sat up, listening, trying to convince myself it was nothing, but the longer it went on, the more anxious I felt. The thuds turned into scratching, like something was being dragged across the floor or the walls. It sounded too deliberate, too strange, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I got up, walked over to the door, and pressed my ear against it, hoping I could hear better. The sound was definitely coming from the next room, and it was closer now, like it was right against the wall we shared. My heart started to race, and I glanced through the peephole, just to check if anything was going on outside. At first, I didn't see anything. The hallway was dim, the light still flickering, and the rain outside made it hard to see much. But then, I caught a movement out of the corner of my eye. Someone was standing outside my door. It was the manager. He was hunched over, his face almost pressed against my door. His hands were at the lock, fiddling with it, and I realized with a jolt that he was trying to pick it. My stomach dropped, and I backed away from the door, my mind racing. What the hell was he doing? Why was he trying to get into my room? I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, my hands shaking as I dialed the front desk. The phone rang a few times before the same raspy voice answered. Front desk, he said, like nothing was wrong. I glanced through the peephole again, and he was still there, still working on the lock. What the hell are you doing at my door? I whispered into the phone, trying to keep my voice steady. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I'm not at your door, he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. My heart was pounding now, my chest tight with panic. I can see you, I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking. I'm looking right at you. Another pause. Then he chuckled, low and slow. You must be mistaken, he said. Nobody's at your door. I hung up, my hand trembling. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. I could still see him through the peephole, still working at the lock, and I knew I didn't have much time before he got it open. I backed away from the door, looking around the room for anything I could use to defend myself. There wasn't much: a lamp on the nightstand, a chair by the small table, but nothing that would help if he got inside. My eyes landed on the window, but the rain was pouring down so hard, and I was on the second floor. Jumping out wasn't an option. I could hear the lock starting to give way, the handle jiggling as he worked it loose. My heart was in my throat now, and I grabbed the chair, dragging it over to the door and wedging it under the handle, trying to block him from getting in. For a moment, everything went quiet. The rain still beat against the window, but the scratching at the door stopped. I pressed my ear to the door again, listening, and all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing, fast and shallow. Then, without warning, the handle turned. The door rattled against the chair, the wood creaking as he tried to push it open. I stumbled back, my heart racing, and grabbed my phone again, dialing 911 with shaky hands. The operator picked up, and I tried to explain what was happening, but my voice was shaking so much I could barely get the words out. Someone's trying to break into my room, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The motel manager, he's at my door. Please, send someone. The operator tried to calm me down, asked for the address, but I couldn't focus. The door rattled again, harder this time, and I could hear the wood starting to splinter. I grabbed the lamp, holding it in front of me like it would actually help if he got inside. I need someone here now, I said, my voice rising in panic. We're sending someone, the operator said. Stay on the line. I stayed on the line, my heart pounding, every second feeling like an eternity. The door rattled again, but then, suddenly, everything stopped. The handle went still, the rattling stopped, and all I could hear was the rain outside. I crept up to the door again, peeking through the peephole. He was gone. I stayed there, my hand gripping the lamp so tight my knuckles were white, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. After what felt like hours, I heard sirens in the distance, and soon after, there was a knock at the door. This time, it wasn't frantic or violent, just a single knock. Police, a voice called out from the other side. I looked through the peephole again, and this time, I saw 2 officers standing outside, their uniforms soaked from the rain. I moved the chair, unlocked the door, and opened it just enough to see them. One of the officers, a tall guy with a serious look on his face, nodded at me. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked. I nodded, still shaking, and stepped aside to let them in. They checked the room, looked around, but of course, the manager was gone. They searched the area around the motel, but they didn't find him. It was like he had just vanished into the storm. They told me I should leave, that it wasn't safe to stay there, and I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my bag, threw on my shoes, and got out of there as fast as I could. The rain hadn't let up, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away from that place, away from him. I don't know what would have happened if he had gotten inside, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out. I was out with my dog, Max, in the woods behind my house. It had been raining all day, and I knew the trails would be slick, but Max needed to stretch his legs, and he loved running through the trees. The rain had let up for a bit, so I figured it was safe enough to go out. It was early evening, still light, though the thick clouds made it feel later. The trees were soaked, leaves dripping, and the air smelled damp and earthy. Max was darting ahead, running circles around me like he always did when he got excited. We were about half an hour in when I stopped to catch my breath. I called Max back, but he didn't come right away, which wasn't too unusual for him. He'd always been a bit stubborn. I figured he was just distracted by something in the underbrush, but when I called his name again, I didn't hear his paws on the wet ground, no rustling of bushes or leaves. Just silence. Max. I shouted louder, but still nothing. I started walking, thinking he couldn't have gone far. The trail twisted and turned, so I figured he was just out of sight. The rain started again, heavier this time, and I pulled my hood up, quickening my pace. The trees seemed to close in around me, the light fading faster than I expected. It didn't take long for the panic to set in. Max wasn't coming back, and the woods felt different. Too quiet. I kept calling out, my voice echoing, but it didn't feel right. It was like the trees were swallowing the sound. Then I heard it, a faint bark. Far off, to my left, deep in the woods. Relief washed over me, and I veered off the trail, pushing through the wet branches, trying to follow the sound. Max. I called again, trying to keep my voice calm. He barked again, closer now, but something about it was off. It didn't sound like him. It was too short, too sharp, like he was scared. My stomach dropped, but I kept going. I had to find him. I pushed through the trees, my boots sinking into the muddy ground. The rain was coming down harder now, making it hard to see. That's when I saw it, the outline of a cabin through the trees. It was old, run down, the wood gray and rotting. I didn't even know there was a cabin out here. I'd been walking these woods for years, and I'd never seen it before. I froze for a moment, just staring at it, something in the back of my mind telling me to turn around, to leave. But then I heard Max again. A whimper this time. It was coming from the cabin. I didn't think. I just ran to the cabin, my heart pounding in my chest. The front door was half open, hanging off its hinges. I stepped inside, and the smell hit me first, damp, mold, and something else, something metallic, like rust or blood. My hands were shaking, and I wiped the rain from my face as I looked around. There was barely any light inside. The windows were covered in grime, but I could make out shapes in the dimness. Old furniture, broken and rotting. A table in the corner with tools scattered across it, sharp and rusted. And in the middle of the room, tied to one of the rotting beams, was Max. His leash was wrapped around the beam, and he was pulling against it, whining and scared. I rushed over, dropping to my knees to untangle him. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the leash off, but I managed to free him. He licked my face, trembling, but something wasn't right. He wasn't looking at me, he was staring past me, his ears flat against his head, his body tense. That's when I felt it. I wasn't alone. The air in the room felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't explain. I slowly stood up, turning around, my eyes scanning the shadows. At first, I didn't see anything, but then, in the corner, where the light barely touched, I saw him. A man, standing perfectly still, just watching me. He was tall, thin, dressed in dark clothes that were soaked from the rain. His face was pale, almost blending into the shadows, but his eyes, they were locked on me, unblinking. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. He just stood there, like he had been waiting. My mouth went dry, and I felt Max press against my leg, whining softly. I didn't know what to do. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. How long had he been there? How did he know I would come? I took a step back, my hand gripping Max's collar tightly. The man's eyes followed me, but he still didn't move. He just watched. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were stuck in place. My brain was screaming at me to do something, but I couldn't. I was frozen. And then, he spoke. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. It sent a chill down my spine, and I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My throat felt like it had closed up. I just stared at him, trying to figure out what he wanted, why he was there. "You took too long," he said, his voice still calm, still quiet. "I was wondering if you'd even come." My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. He had been waiting. For me. I tightened my grip on Max and took another step back, my mind racing. I didn't know what he was planning, but I knew I needed to get out of there. "I'm just here for my dog," I finally managed to say, my voice shaky. "I didn't mean to." "Doesn't matter," he interrupted, taking a step forward, finally moving. "You're here now." I backed up until I was against the wall, the old wood creaking under my weight. Max was trembling, and I could feel his fear. The man took another step, and I could see him clearer now. His face was hollow, his skin stretched too tight over his bones, and his eyes, they were wrong. Too dark, too empty. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I had to get out. Without thinking, I grabbed the first thing I could find, a broken chair leg lying on the floor, and swung it at him as hard as I could. He didn't expect it. The wood connected with his arm, and he stumbled back, hissing through his teeth in pain. That was all I needed. I grabbed Max's leash and ran, pushing past the man and bolting for the door. I didn't look back. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps quick and heavy on the wet floor, but I didn't stop. I burst through the door and into the rain, the cold air hitting me like a slap to the face. I ran, my boots slipping in the mud, Max pulling me forward. The rain was coming down so hard I could barely see, but I didn't care. I just kept running, my lungs burning, my legs screaming at me to stop, but I couldn't. I wouldn't. I didn't stop until I was back on the trail, the familiar path leading me back toward the house. Only then did I dare to look back. He wasn't there. The cabin was hidden in the trees, the rain making it almost impossible to see, but I knew he was still there. Watching. Waiting. I didn't stop running until I reached my house, slamming the door behind me and locking it tight. Max was panting, shaking, but we were safe. For now. I don't go into those woods anymore. I can't. I know he's still out there, waiting for the next person to wander too far, to take too long. We were on a road trip, my wife Sarah and I, just trying to get away for a while. We hadn't planned on taking a route this remote, but it was a shortcut according to the map. There weren't many gas stations out this way, and by the time we spotted one, it had already started raining hard. It wasn't one of those big, bright stations like you'd see in a city. This one was old, worn down, barely a sign to tell you it was even open. The kind of place you wouldn't stop at unless you had to. But we needed gas, and the storm was getting worse, so we pulled in. The rain was pounding against the car, and the wind was so strong it rocked the vehicle. We hurried out, trying to pump gas as fast as possible. The lights in the station flickered like they were on the verge of dying, and I remember thinking something didn't feel right about the place. But I didn't say anything to Sarah. We just wanted to get out of there. When I went to start the car, though, it didn't turn over. I tried again. Nothing. My heart sank. Sarah gave me this worried look, and I knew we were in trouble. We were miles from anywhere, and I couldn't even see a house or another building around, just miles of empty road and trees in every direction. It was almost completely dark by then, with only the faint glow from the station's flickering lights. I got out of the car to check under the hood, though I didn't really know what I was looking for. Just then, a beat-up old truck pulled into the station. 2 men and a woman got out, locals from the look of them. They didn't say anything at first, just stared at us as the rain poured down. The older man, who must have been in his late 50s, finally walked over and asked if we needed help. I told him the car wouldn't start, and he offered to take a look. He poked around under the hood for a minute, then stepped back and shook his head. "Looks like it's dead," he said. "You won't be going anywhere tonight, not in this storm." Sarah looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That's when the woman spoke up. She was younger, maybe in her 30s, with stringy hair and a thin face. "We got a place not far from here," she said. "You can come with us, wait out the storm, and we'll help you in the morning." Everything in me screamed not to go with them. Something about the way they were standing there, watching us, didn't sit right. But the storm was only getting worse, and we didn't have any other options. We were stuck, miles from anywhere, with no cell signal. I didn't want to spend the night in the car, not with the weather as bad as it was. "Thank you," I said, though my stomach twisted as I said it. They didn't have much room in their truck, so I sat up front with the older man, while Sarah sat in the back with the other two. The ride was silent for the most part, except for the rain pounding against the windshield. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to figure out where we were going, but the longer we drove, the more it felt like we were heading farther into nowhere. The road turned from pavement to gravel, and then finally to dirt, winding through thick woods that seemed to go on forever. After what felt like an hour, we pulled up to a house. If you could even call it that. It was more like a shack, barely standing, with the wood rotting and the windows covered in grime. The rain had eased up a little, but the wind still howled through the trees. The place gave me the creeps just looking at it. I glanced at Sarah, and I could tell she was thinking the same thing, but we didn't say anything. What were we supposed to do? We were stuck. We followed them inside. The house smelled like mildew and damp wood. The walls were bare except for a few rusted tools hanging from nails. There was a single, dim light bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long shadows that made the place feel even smaller. The older man pointed to a room off to the side. "You can sleep in there," he said. "We'll leave first thing in the morning, and I'll help you get the car started." Something about the way he said it didn't feel right. The way he kept glancing at the other two, like they were in on some kind of secret. Sarah clutched my arm, her eyes pleading. I knew we shouldn't stay, but what choice did we have? We went into the room, and the door closed behind us with a heavy thud. The room was small, with a single bed that looked like it hadn't been slept in for years. The window was cracked, and I could feel the cold air seeping in. There was no lock on the door, and that sent a shiver down my spine. "They're up to something," Sarah whispered. "I don't trust them." "I know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But we just need to get through the night. We'll leave first thing." I tried to sound confident, but deep down, I didn't believe it. Something about the whole situation felt wrong. The way they had just shown up at the gas station, the way they kept watching us like we were prey. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had walked into a trap, We laid down on the bed, but I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every gust of wind against the house made me jump. I could hear faint voices from the other room, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I just kept my eyes on the door, waiting for something to happen. Hours passed, and the storm outside raged on. The rain beat against the roof, the wind howling like it was trying to tear the place apart. And then, just as I was starting to doze off, I heard footsteps outside the door. They were soft at first, barely noticeable over the sound of the storm. But they got louder, closer, until they stopped right outside the door. I held my breath, listening. And then, slowly, the doorknob turned. I shot up, my heart pounding in my chest. Sarah was awake now too, her eyes wide with fear. The door didn't open all the way, just enough for someone to peer in. I couldn't see who it was, just the outline of a figure in the darkness. "Is everything all right?" I called out, trying to keep my voice calm. The door didn't move. The figure didn't respond. They just stood there, watching us. I got out of bed, moving toward the door slowly. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I couldn't just stand there. As I got closer, the door suddenly slammed shut, the sound echoing through the small room. "We need to get out of here," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. I nodded, my mind racing. There was no way we were staying until morning. I didn't know what those people wanted, but it wasn't good. We waited for what felt like hours, listening for any movement outside. When we were sure it was quiet, I slowly opened the door. The house was dark, except for the faint glow of the light bulb in the main room. The front door was just a few feet away, but it felt like miles. I grabbed Sarah's hand, and we crept toward the door, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The floor creaked under our feet, and I held my breath, praying they wouldn't hear us. We were almost to the door when I heard a noise behind us. I turned, and there they were, the three of them, standing at the far end of the hallway, watching us. Their faces were blank, emotionless, but their eyes, they were full of something I couldn't explain. Hunger, maybe. I didn't wait to find out what they wanted. I threw open the door, pulling Sarah outside into the rain. We ran, slipping and stumbling through the mud, not stopping until we reached the edge of the woods. The storm had calmed, but the wind still howled through the trees. We didn't have a plan, didn't know where we were going, but we just kept running. Eventually, we made it back to the road, and by some miracle, a passing truck picked us up. We never went back for the car. I spent the night alone in my family's old cabin. It was one of those places that had been in the family for years but hadn't been used much lately. I figured it would be nice to get away from everything for a few days, clear my head. The cabin wasn't too far from the city, but far enough that there was no cell service, no neighbors for miles. It had always been a quiet, peaceful place growing up, and I figured it still would be. The rain started around noon, just light at first, then getting heavier as the day went on. By evening, it was coming down in sheets, drumming against the roof. I didn't mind. It made the place feel cozy, and I had a fire going, a book in my lap. The wind picked up too, howling through the trees outside, but the cabin was solid, nothing to worry about. I don't remember what time it was when I first heard the footsteps. I'd been drifting in and out of sleep, the fire burning low, when something made me sit up. It wasn't loud, just the soft crunch of footsteps on the wet ground outside. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or something. But it was too slow, too deliberate. I got up and walked to the window, pulling the curtain back just a little. The rain was still coming down hard, and I couldn't see much through the water streaking down the glass. But then, in the faint glow from the fire, I saw him. A man, standing in the yard, just past the tree line. He wasn't moving. Just standing there, staring at the cabin. My heart jumped into my throat. I hadn't seen anyone out here all day. There were no other houses around for miles, and the road leading to the cabin was barely passable with the rain. He was just there, like he'd come out of nowhere. I let the curtain fall back and stepped away from the window. My hands were shaking, but I told myself it wasn't a big deal. Maybe he was lost, or his car broke down. I hadn't heard any vehicles, but with the rain, maybe I just missed it. He could have been trying to find help. But something about the way he was standing out there, not moving, didn't feel right. I waited for him to come closer, maybe knock on the door, but he didn't. He just stood there, staring at the cabin. I kept telling myself to go outside, ask if he needed help, but every instinct in me was screaming not to. Minutes passed, and he didn't move. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I grabbed my phone out of habit, but there was no service, no way to call anyone. The landline in the cabin had been dead for years. I went to the back door, locking it as quietly as I could, then checked the front. It was already locked, but I slid the deadbolt across, just in case. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. Should I wait him out? Maybe he'd leave on his own. Or should I confront him? Another minute passed, then I heard the footsteps again. Slowly, he was walking toward the cabin. I backed away from the door, my legs shaking so bad I thought I'd collapse. The footsteps stopped, and the cabin fell silent again, except for the rain. I didn't dare look out the window this time. I didn't want to see him standing right outside. Then, a soft knock on the door. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't loud, just a soft, steady tap. I could hear the rain pattering against the windows, the wind shaking the trees, but that knock, it cut through all of it. I stood there, staring at the door, too terrified to move. He knocked again, just as soft, almost like he was being careful not to wake me, or maybe he didn't want anyone else to hear. But there was no one else. Just me and him. I forced myself to move, stepping closer to the door, but I didn't open it. I leaned in, listening for anything. Maybe he would say something, ask for help, tell me why he was there. But there was nothing. Just silence. I stood there for what felt like hours, waiting for him to go away, but he didn't. I could feel him out there, standing just on the other side of the door, as if he knew I was waiting inside, just as scared of him as he was patient with me. Then, slowly, I heard him move away from the door. His footsteps were soft, almost drowned out by the rain, but I could hear him. He was circling the cabin. I bolted to the window, peeking through the curtain. I saw him again, walking around the side of the cabin, his head down like he was searching for something. My heart was racing, and my mind was screaming at me to do something, but I didn't know what. I didn't have anything to protect myself with, and there was no way I was going outside in the storm, not with him out there. The footsteps stopped again, this time right under the window. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't see me, but then I saw his face. He was staring right at me, his eyes meeting mine through the glass. He didn't look surprised or angry. He just stared at me, like he'd been expecting me to be there the whole time. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I ran to the door, checking the locks again, then grabbed the fireplace poker from the hearth. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. I backed up against the wall, holding the poker in front of me, my eyes darting between the windows and the door. The footsteps started again, slow and deliberate, like he was in no rush. He circled the cabin a few more times, his shadow passing by the windows. I could hear him stop every so often, pausing like he was waiting for me to make a move, but I stayed where I was, frozen with fear. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps finally stopped. I waited, my whole body trembling, listening for any sign of him, but there was nothing. Just the sound of the rain and the wind. I stayed there, pressed against the wall, the poker clutched in my hands, for hours. The storm started to ease up, and eventually, the first light of dawn crept through the windows. Only then did I dare move. I peered out the window, my heart still racing, but he was gone. The yard was empty, the woods quiet. I waited another hour before I finally gathered the courage to step outside. There were footprints in the mud, leading around the cabin, circling it like a predator stalking its prey. They disappeared into the woods, fading into the distance. I didn't follow them. I didn't want to know where they led. I packed up my things as fast as I could, throwing everything into the car and driving away without looking back. I was driving home late one night on the highway, rain pounding on the windshield so hard I could barely see past the wipers. The road was nearly empty, just me and the occasional car passing by in the other lane. I had been on the road for hours, my back stiff from sitting so long, and I was anxious to get home, but the rain made it hard to go fast. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed hazard lights blinking up ahead. A car pulled over to the side of the road, the red lights flashing through the rain. It was one of those nights where you could barely make out anything more than a few feet in front of you, but I could see the silhouette of the car, water streaming off it. At first, I wasn't sure if I should stop. It was late, and something about the rain made everything feel eerie. But then I thought, what if it was me stranded out there in the middle of nowhere with no help? The nearest town was miles back, and there wouldn't be much traffic at this time of night. I figured I'd at least pull over and see if they needed a ride or to use my phone. I slowed down and parked a few feet behind the car. The rain was coming down in thick sheets, making it hard to see much. I sat there for a moment, peering through the rain-streaked windshield, but I couldn't make out anyone in the car. I grabbed my jacket and got out, pulling it tight around me as I jogged up to the car. It was an older sedan, beat up and rusting along the sides. The hazard lights blinked in a steady rhythm, cutting through the darkness. I knocked on the driver's side window, waiting for whoever was inside to roll it down. But no one did. I bent down, peering through the glass. That's when I saw the driver, slumped over the steering wheel. My heart jumped in my chest, and for a second, I thought they might be hurt or worse. I knocked harder, my knuckles rapping against the cold glass, trying to get their attention. The driver didn't move. I stood there, rain soaking through my jacket, trying to figure out what to do. The door was unlocked. Maybe I should open it, see if they were okay. But something held me back. Something about the way the person was sitting there, too still, felt wrong. Like they weren't just unconscious or asleep, more like they were pretending. I backed away from the car, suddenly feeling like I'd made a mistake. My car was still running, the engine humming behind me, and I turned back toward it, thinking I should just leave. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw the driver move. Just a small twitch of the head, almost imperceptible through the rain, but I saw it. They were awake. They'd been awake the whole time. My stomach tightened, and every instinct told me to get out of there, but I froze, standing in the rain like an idiot, staring at the car. Then, slowly, the driver turned their head toward me. I could barely make out their face through the rain and the dark, but I saw enough. Their eyes were wide open, locked on me, and they had this strange, blank look on their face. Not scared, not surprised, just staring. That's when the passenger door creaked open. I didn't see anyone in the car before, but now there was a second person, sliding out from the passenger seat. They moved slow, almost casual, like they weren't in any hurry at all. The rain was pouring down, drenching them in seconds, but they didn't seem to care. They stood up straight, looking right at me, their face half hidden by the hood of their jacket. I backed up, my heart pounding in my chest. They didn't say anything, didn't ask for help or explain what was going on. They just stood there, watching me, while the driver kept staring through the windshield. I turned and started walking back toward my car, trying to keep calm, but I could feel them behind me. I didn't want to run, didn't want to make it obvious that I was scared, but I was terrified. My car was only a few feet away, the driver's side door still open, and I was almost there when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, and the passenger was walking toward me, still slow, still calm, like they had all the time in the world. The driver was out of the car now too, standing beside it, watching. I didn't know what they wanted, but I knew it wasn't good. I broke into a run, diving into my car and slamming the door shut behind me. My hands were shaking as I fumbled to throw it into drive. The passenger was almost at my door, their hand reaching out for the handle just as I hit the gas. The tires spun on the wet pavement for a second before catching, and I sped off, the car fishtailing as I pulled back onto the highway. I glanced in the rearview mirror, my heart racing, and saw them standing in the road, watching me drive away. The hazard lights were still blinking, flashing red in the distance until the rain swallowed them up. I drove for miles, not stopping, not slowing down, even when the rain started to ease up. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what just happened. Why were they sitting there, pretending to be in trouble? Why didn't they say anything? And why were they just waiting? I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town, my hands still shaking as I pulled into a gas station. I sat there for a long time, the engine idling, staring at the rain running down the windshield, trying to calm down. I don't know what they wanted or what would have happened if I hadn't gotten away. But I do know one thing, I'll never stop for anyone on the side of the road again. I was walking home from work one stormy night, the rain hammering down so hard it felt like the sky was falling. I had hoped the weather would ease up, but as I stepped out of the office, it hit me all at once. My shoes were already soaked, and the streets glistened under the streetlights, reflecting the chaotic dance of raindrops. I pulled my coat tighter around me, wishing I had brought my umbrella. As I trudged along the sidewalk, I spotted the old bridge ahead. I knew it wasn't the best place to seek shelter, but I figured it would be better than standing out in the open. I quickened my pace, eager to get beneath its overhang and away from the relentless downpour. When I stepped under the bridge, the sound of the rain softened slightly. The shadows wrapped around me, providing some relief from the storm. I took a moment to catch my breath, feeling the cool air brush against my damp skin. I was grateful for the brief pause. But then I noticed something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There was someone else beneath the bridge, hiding in the darkness. At first, I couldn't make out any details, just a vague shape hunched down against the concrete. My heart started to race as I wondered if I should turn back, but it was too late. The figure moved, shifting into the light. "Hey, you," the person shouted, their voice cutting through the sound of the rain. It was a man, maybe in his 30s, wearing a dark hoodie. His eyes were wild, darting between me and the shadows around us. "I need you to give me your money." I took a step back, my mind racing. I had never been in a situation like this before. I don't have any cash," I stammered, trying to sound calm. I felt my pulse quicken, fear creeping in as I glanced toward the street. There were no cars in sight. No one to help me. Don't lie to me, he snapped, stepping closer. I could see his face now, rainwater running down his cheeks. He looked desperate. I saw you leave the bar. I know you have something. I really don't, I insisted, trying to keep my voice steady. I thought about running, but the thought of dashing into the rain felt even worse. I couldn't risk making him angry. Empty your pockets, he said, his tone low and dangerous. The way he stared at me sent a chill through my body. I looked around, hoping for a glimpse of someone else, but the street was empty, the rain drowning out any noise. I hesitated, feeling trapped. Please, I said, I'm just trying to get home. His expression hardened. I don't care. You think I want to be here? Just give me what you've got. I felt my throat tighten, panic rising. I slowly reached into my pocket, feeling for my wallet. It was all I had on me, but I knew that it contained more than just money. It had my ID, my cards, everything that could be traced back to me. I pulled it out, hands shaking, and held it in front of him. Here, I said, voice trembling. Take it. He snatched it from my hand, rifling through it. I watched as his face twisted in anger. This is all you have? He spat, tossing the wallet back at me. It hit my chest and fell to the ground, rain soaking it immediately. I told you I don't have any cash, I replied, trying to stay calm, but it was getting harder. Stop lying. He stepped forward again, closer than before. I could smell the alcohol on his breath, mixing with the rain. You must have something. People like you always do. At that moment, I could see the desperation in his eyes, but there was also something darker, something that made me realize he might not care if things escalated. My instinct screamed at me to move, to run. Listen, I said, raising my hands as if to calm him. I really have nothing else. I promise. Just let me go. I stepped backward, still keeping my eyes locked on his. He seemed to falter for a moment, his expression shifting from anger to confusion. You're just gonna leave? Yes, I said firmly. I am. Just let me go. There was a long pause, the rain pounding down like a metronome. I could feel the weight of the situation hanging in the air. I took another step back, glancing toward the exit of the bridge, calculating my next move. Suddenly, he lunged forward, grabbing my arm. You think you can just walk away from me? Adrenaline shot through my body. Without thinking, I jerked my arm away and bolted toward the street, my heart racing in my chest. I ran as fast as I could, my feet splashing through puddles, the cold rain stinging my face. I could hear him yelling behind me, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I dashed into the street, my breath coming in quick gasps as I scanned for any sign of life. I saw headlights in the distance, a car approaching. I ran toward it, waving my arms, desperate for help. The car slowed down, and I hurried to the side of the road, my heart still pounding. The driver, an older man, rolled down his window, concern etched on his face. Are you okay? Please, I gasped. I need help. Someone is after me. Without hesitation, he unlocked the doors. I jumped in, slamming the door shut behind me. The warmth of the car enveloped me, but my heart was still racing. Drive, please, I said, urgency spilling from my voice. He glanced at me, then back to the road, and hit the gas. As we sped away, I turned to look back. I could see the figure standing at the edge of the bridge, watching us disappear into the distance. The rain fell like a curtain, hiding what I hoped would be the end of that encounter. I sat in silence, the realization of what had just happened sinking in. I had escaped, but the memory of that night lingered in my mind like the echo of thunder in the distance. I had planned to spend the evening reading a book, but the storm had other ideas. The lights flickered, and just as I settled into my favorite chair with a cup of tea, everything went dark. The power was out. I sighed, setting my book aside. I knew the city often experienced outages during storms, but it always managed to throw me off guard. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, its beam cutting through the darkness. I shuffled around, searching for candles. The wind held outside, and I lit a few, placing them around the room for some warmth and light. The quiet felt strange. It was usually filled with the comforting hum of the refrigerator or the faint noise of traffic below. Now, all I could hear was the rain and the occasional crack of thunder. I tried to focus on the soft flickering light of the candles, but my mind wandered. I checked my phone, but there was no signal. After a while, the darkness felt heavier. I began to feel a growing sense of unease. I convinced myself it was just a storm, that I was safe in my apartment, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My heart raced as I moved from room to room, peering out of the windows, looking for signs of life outside. The streets were dark, and the rain poured down relentlessly. Then I heard it. A sound that made my blood run cold. It was a faint scratching noise, like fingernails on wood. I froze, straining to listen. It came from the door. My mind raced with possibilities. I felt as if the world around me had closed in. I had to convince myself it was just the wind, but I knew better. I moved cautiously toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I pressed my ear against it, trying to determine whether I was imagining things. Then I heard it again, louder this time. It was followed by a thud against the door, a heavy sound that echoed through the dark apartment. Panic surged through me. My mind raced, trying to think clearly. I should call the police, but my phone had no signal. I glanced around, looking for something I could use to defend myself. The kitchen was too far away. I grabbed a small metal candlestick, gripping it tightly in my hand. Another thud reverberated through the door, followed by muffled voices. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the urgency in their tone was clear. They were trying to get in. My heart raced, and I fought the urge to run. I stood frozen, listening, weighing my options. Let me in. I need help, a voice shouted from the other side. It was a man's voice, frantic and desperate. I took a step back, trying to steady my breathing. I couldn't tell if he was lying or if he really needed help. The power outage had left me vulnerable, and I couldn't trust anyone. Please. I really need to get inside, he yelled again, his voice rising with frustration. My friends left me behind. They're going to leave me out here. I swallowed hard, my pulse quickening. I could hear the unmistakable sound of a lock being jiggled, and I pressed my back against the wall, clutching the candlestick tighter. I felt my skin crawl, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. Open the door. I swear I won't hurt you. His voice was louder now, more insistent. The thought of letting a stranger in during a storm felt foolish. The apartment was too dark, and I couldn't see his face. I wanted to scream back at him, to tell him to go away, but my voice caught in my throat. What if he was telling the truth? What if he was just trying to play with my mind? The door rattled again, and I felt the floor beneath my feet shift as he leaned against it, pushing with all his weight. I could hear the wood creak, and I knew that if he was strong enough, he might break through. Please, he shouted, desperation lacing his voice. I can't stay out here. I'm scared. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think. I had to get to safety. I had to protect myself. What do you want? I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady despite the fear creeping in. I just want to get in. I'm scared of the storm. I need help. You are not getting in. Go away. I yelled, hoping my voice sounded more confident than I felt. The silence that followed felt suffocating. For a brief moment, I thought maybe he would leave, that he would accept my refusal and move on. But then the sound of his laughter broke through the quiet. It was not a kind laugh, it was dark and unsettling. I'm not going anywhere. You don't want to open the door? Fine. I'll just wait until you change your mind. My stomach twisted. I didn't know what to do. I could hear him pacing outside, footsteps muffled by the rain. I could not let him know how terrified I was. After what felt like an eternity, the sound of his footsteps stopped. I felt a mix of dread and relief. I peered through the peephole in the door, but all I could see was darkness. Had he left? My heart raced as I strained to listen. And then I heard it again. The scraping noise was back, more persistent than before. My breath hitched as I realized he was trying to pick the lock. Panic surged through me. I had to do something. I backed away from the door, holding my candlestick like a weapon. I heard the lock click, and I knew he was close. I was running out of time. I turned and dashed to the kitchen, my heart pounding in my ears. I opened the drawer and grabbed a kitchen knife, its blade glinting in the candlelight. The door rattled again, the sound echoing through the room. I was about to lose everything. I could hear him breathing, waiting, lurking outside. I could feel the weight of his presence pressing against me, and the thought of what might happen next sent a shiver down my spine. "Let me in," he shouted again, his voice low and threatening. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will if I have to." I couldn't respond. My mind was racing, and I felt trapped. There was nowhere to go. I was just a woman alone in a dark apartment, and I had no idea how far he would go. The door shuttered again, and I heard a loud crack. My heart sank as the door frame splintered, and I knew he was getting inside. I tightened my grip on the knife, adrenaline coursing through my veins. With a surge of courage, I raced to the back door of the kitchen. It was a small exit that led to the fire escape. I had to get out before he got in. I flung the door open, rain pouring down in torrents, and stepped outside. I could hear the man cursing behind me, and I didn't look back. I sprinted down the narrow staircase, my heart racing as I reached the bottom. The rain soaked me to the bone, but I didn't care. I ran across the courtyard and into the street, my shoes splashing in puddles. I didn't stop. I ran until I reached the main road, where the lights flickered back to life. I turned to see if he was following me, but I could only see shadows moving in the rain. As I approached a nearby convenience store, I saw the flickering neon lights of the open sign. Relief washed over me as I dashed inside. The cashier looked at me, alarmed, and I gasped for breath, my heart still racing. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern in his eyes. "I need to call the police," I managed to say, feeling the weight of what had just happened crashing down on me. As I dialed the number, I knew that I had escaped something terrible. The rain continued to fall outside, but I was safe now. I would never forget that stormy night, the fear that had gripped me, and the knowledge that I had fought to survive. It was one of those nights where everything seemed to go wrong. I had stayed late at work, trying to finish up a report that had taken longer than I expected. The rain outside had started hours before, but by the time I was wrapping up, it had turned into a full-blown storm. I could hear it hammering against the windows of the office building, the wind howling like it was trying to rip the place apart. I should have left earlier, but I didn't. And that's where things went wrong. It was past midnight when I finally grabbed my stuff and headed for the elevator. The whole building felt empty, as it always did that late. Just me and the security guard, probably half asleep in his little booth downstairs. I pressed the button for the elevator, and as I waited, I glanced at the rain pounding the glass doors of the lobby. It was coming down hard, like sheets of water, and lightning flashed every few minutes, lighting up the sky. The elevator dinged, and I stepped inside, hitting the button for the lobby. The doors closed, and I leaned back against the wall, feeling exhausted. All I could think about was getting home, getting out of the wet clothes I'd soon be wearing, and collapsing into bed. That's when the elevator jerked. It was subtle at first, a slight shudder, but enough to make me stand up straight. I looked around, confused, just as the lights flickered. The storm outside must have been worse than I thought. Before I could do anything, the elevator jerked again, harder this time, and then stopped. Dead. The lights went out, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, the small screen casting a dim light in the cramped space. I hit the call button for the emergency line in the elevator, but there was no response. I tried again. Nothing. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. At first, it was just a feeling. You know that sense you get when someone's watching you? It crept over me, making the hairs on my neck stand up. I shined my phone's light around the elevator, but it wasn't strong enough to cut through the darkness beyond a few feet. Then I heard it. Breathing. It was soft, barely there, but enough to tell me someone was in the elevator with me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to make sense of it. I hadn't seen anyone when I got in. I was sure of it. But now, in the pitch black of the elevator, someone else was definitely there. I cleared my throat, trying to sound calm. Hello? Who's there? No answer. Just more breathing, steady and quiet, like whoever it was didn't want me to notice them. I shined my phone light around again, slowly this time, sweeping it from corner to corner. The space wasn't big, and I was sure I would have seen someone. But no matter where I pointed the light, I couldn't see anyone. The breathing continued. I backed up, pressing myself against the wall of the elevator, holding the phone in front of me like it would somehow protect me. I was trying to stay calm, but the fear was creeping in. I didn't know what was happening, and the storm outside only made it worse. The sound of rain hitting the building was deafening now, a constant drumming that seemed to close in around me. Then I heard movement. It was a soft rustling, like fabric shifting. Whoever was in there with me was moving, but not towards me. It sounded like they were shuffling, staying low, trying to stay out of the light. I swung the phone around again, frantically now, trying to catch them in the beam, but all I saw were shadows and the dull metal walls of the elevator. I pressed the emergency call button again, over and over, but still nothing. My phone had no signal either. The storm must have knocked everything out. That's when I heard the whispering. It was faint, almost like it was right in my ear, but I couldn't make out the words. It was like whoever was in there with me was talking to themselves, whispering under their breath, just loud enough for me to know they were doing it. My blood ran cold. I pressed myself harder against the wall, trying to figure out what to do. I thought about making a run for it, hitting the button to open the doors, but the power was out, and I wasn't sure it would even work. Plus, the elevator was stuck between floors. There was no telling how far the drop might be if I pried the doors open. I was trapped. The whispering got louder, still unintelligible, but more urgent, like the person was getting more agitated. I was sweating now, my hands shaking as I gripped my phone, the battery slowly draining away. I couldn't stay in the dark like this, not with whoever this was. Then, out of nowhere, the whispering stopped. Silence filled the elevator, except for the rain outside. I held my breath, straining to hear anything. I waited, listening, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. And then, I felt it. A hand. It brushed against my leg, just for a second, light as a feather, but enough to make me jolt. I swung the phone down, aiming the light at the floor. For a split second, I saw something. A figure, crouched low, just at the edge of the beam of light. And then they moved, fast, darting back into the shadows before I could get a clear look. I panicked. I dropped my phone, the light spinning across the floor before going out completely. The elevator was plunged back into darkness, and I could feel the person getting closer. I could hear them now, breathing heavier, their movements quicker, like they were crawling toward me. I scrambled, trying to find my phone, but I couldn't see anything. My fingers brushed against cold metal and empty space, and then I felt them again, hands. They grabbed at my ankle, tight, pulling me down. I kicked, trying to free myself, and managed to break loose. I scrambled backward, pressing myself into the corner of the elevator, my hands searching blindly for anything I could use to defend myself. I felt the cold, hard surface of the emergency panel and started slamming my fist against it. I didn't know if it would help, but I was desperate. The sound of my pounding echoed in the small space, and then, suddenly, the lights flickered back on. I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the sudden brightness, and looked around. The elevator was empty. There was no one else there. I stared at the floor, confused, my heart still racing. Had I imagined it? The fear, the hands grabbing at me, it had all felt so real. But now, in the harsh fluorescent light, there was nothing. Just me, alone in the elevator. I shakily picked up my phone from the floor, checking the signal. Still nothing. The storm outside continued to rage, the sound of rain pounding the building louder than ever. I hit the emergency button one last time, and this time, it crackled to life. "Hello? Is anyone there?" A voice came through the speaker. I almost sobbed in relief. "Yes. I'm stuck in the elevator. I need help." "Hang tight," the voice said. "We'll send someone right away. The storm knocked out the power, but it's coming back slowly." "Are you hurt?" "No," I said, still looking around the elevator, half expecting something to jump out of the shadows. "I'm fine. Just hurry." I slumped against the wall, my heart still racing, waiting for the rescue crew to arrive. I kept glancing around the elevator, half expecting to see the figure again, but the minutes ticked by, and nothing happened. No more whispering, no more hands reaching for me. Just the hum of the building as the power slowly returned. When the maintenance team finally pried open the elevator doors and pulled me out, I could barely speak. I just nodded, thanking them, and left as fast as I could. I didn't look back, didn't tell them what had happened. I wasn't sure if I could explain it if I tried. All I know is, something or someone was in that elevator with me. I was driving home late that night, and the rain was coming down harder than I'd ever seen. The windshield wipers were on full speed, but they barely made a difference. Everything outside was just a blur of darkness and water. I was tired, more tired than I should have been behind the wheel, but I wanted to get home. I had spent too long visiting my mom, and by the time I left, the storm had already started. I took what I thought was the right exit, but something was off. The road was narrow, barely any streetlights, and the GPS on my phone kept losing signal. The roads were winding and confusing, and soon enough, I realized I had no idea where I was. I'd made a wrong turn somewhere. The rain made it worse. I could hardly see anything beyond the car's headlights, and everything looked the same. No signs, no landmarks, just trees and houses, barely visible through the sheets of rain. I tried to check the GPS again, but the signal was still weak. I needed to turn around, go back the way I came. I saw a driveway up ahead, one of the few houses with lights on, and figured I'd pull in just to turn around. It looked like a big house, an old one, set back from the road with a long driveway that disappeared into the shadows. The whole place felt off, but I didn't think much of it. I just wanted to turn around and get back on the main road. I pulled into the driveway, eased the car to a stop, and put it in reverse, ready to back out. That's when I saw someone coming out of the house. At first, I thought maybe they were just checking what the noise was, but then I noticed something in his hand, a gun. He was walking toward me fast, waving the gun around, and I could see he wasn't just curious. He was angry. I froze for a second, my heart pounding in my chest. The rain was hammering on the roof of the car, but I could hear him shouting, his voice muffled through the downpour. "Get out of the car," he yelled, coming closer. "What the hell are you doing here?" I panicked. I didn't know what to do. My hands were shaking, and for a second, I couldn't even think straight. I kept the car in reverse, but didn't move. My mind raced. Was he going to shoot me? Why was he acting like this? I cracked the window just a bit, the rain instantly spraying in. "I'm just turning around," I shouted back, trying to stay calm. I took a wrong turn. "I'm leaving." But he wasn't listening. He was closer now, the gun raised, his face twisted in rage. "Why are you here? Who sent you? Get out of the car." His voice was louder now, more desperate, like he didn't believe me. I didn't know what to do. My instinct was to just drive, to back out and get away, but I was afraid any sudden move would make him pull the trigger. The rain was coming down so hard I could barely see him through the windshield, but I could still make out the outline of the gun, the way it was pointed right at me. "I swear, I'm leaving," I said again, louder this time. "I'm lost. I just need to turn around." For a moment, he just stood there, staring at me, the rain pouring down around him. He looked like he was thinking, deciding what to do. His eyes were wide, paranoid, and I could see him gripping the gun tighter. My heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. Then, without warning, he slammed the butt of the gun against the side of my car, hard enough that I jumped. "Out!" he screamed. "Now!" I didn't know if he was going to shoot me or not, but I wasn't going to wait and find out. My hands fumbled with the gear shift, and I backed out of the driveway as fast as I could, the tires skidding on the wet pavement. He was still yelling, running after the car, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out of there. I got back onto the road, the rain still pounding down, and floored it. My heart was racing, my whole body shaking. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but he wasn't following me. The house was just a dark blur behind me, disappearing into the storm. For a while, I just drove, not caring where I was going, as long as it was away from that place. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Why had he been so angry? Why had he reacted like that? Eventually, I found my way back to the main road. The GPS signal came back, and I managed to figure out where I was. I was miles away from where I should have been, far off the route home. The rain was still heavy, but the further I drove, the more I started to calm down. I couldn't stop thinking about the man with the gun. The way he looked at me, like I was some kind of threat, like he was convinced I was there for a reason. I didn't understand it. All I wanted was to turn around and get back on track, but to him, it was something more. Something dangerous. By the time I finally got home, hours later, I was exhausted. I parked the car and sat there for a minute, listening to the rain pattering on the roof, trying to shake the fear that still clung to me. I couldn't get the image of him out of my head, the way he'd come out of the house, gun in hand, ready to do something terrible. I never told anyone about it. I just wanted to forget it, to put it behind me like it never happened. But I couldn't. Every time I drove in the rain after that, I thought about him. I thought about what would have happened if I hadn't backed out in time, if I'd gotten out of the car like he demanded. I don't know what he was afraid of that night, but I know one thing: I wasn't sticking around to find out. The rain had started not long after we set up camp. At first, it was just a light drizzle, barely enough to worry about, but by the time the sun went down, it had turned into a steady downpour. We were out there for the weekend, just me and my friend Jake, like we'd done a few times before. Nothing fancy, just a couple of nights camping in the woods, away from everything. We liked the quiet, and this spot, about a 2-hour drive from the city, was perfect for that. It was around 8 p.m. when the rain started getting heavier. We were both soaked, even though we'd set up a tarp over the fire pit. The fire was barely hanging on, hissing and sputtering under the weight of the rain. Jake had been saying for a while that we needed more wood, but I was just sitting there, trying to keep dry and warm. He eventually stood up, shaking his head. "I'll go grab some more," he said. "You stay here, try to get this fire going again." I didn't think anything of it at the time. We'd done this before. One of us would go off to grab firewood while the other stayed behind. It wasn't a big deal. He grabbed a flashlight, pulled up his hood, and headed into the trees. The light from his flashlight bounced through the rain as he disappeared into the woods. I sat there for a while, poking at the fire, trying to keep it alive. The rain wasn't letting up, and it was getting harder to keep the fire going. After a few minutes, I realized Jake hadn't come back yet. I checked my watch. He'd been gone for about 15 minutes, which wasn't that long, but longer than it should have taken to grab some wood from nearby. I waited a little longer, assuming he was just having trouble finding dry wood. Maybe he'd gone farther into the woods to find something that wasn't soaked. But after another 10 minutes, I started to get worried. The fire was almost out, and the rain was coming down harder, turning the ground into mud. I called out his name, but there was no answer. I grabbed my flashlight, pulled my jacket tighter around me, and headed into the woods in the direction he'd gone. The rain was so loud, pounding against the trees and leaves, that it drowned out everything else. I could barely hear my own footsteps, and the beam of my flashlight wasn't doing much to cut through the darkness. Everything was wet and slippery, and it was hard to see more than a few feet ahead. "Jake!" I called out again, louder this time. Still nothing. I kept walking, trying to follow the path he would have taken. I wasn't worried at first, not really. Maybe he'd just gotten turned around, or maybe he'd found a big log and was dragging it back. But after a few more minutes of calling his name with no response, I started to feel uneasy. It wasn't like Jake to wander off without saying something, and he definitely wouldn't have ignored me if he'd heard me calling. That's when I noticed something strange. The ground in front of me looked disturbed, like something heavy had been dragged through the mud. I knelt down, shining my flashlight on it. It wasn't a trail made by an animal, and it wasn't just the rain washing away the dirt. It was a clear drag mark, as if someone or something had been pulled through the mud. My heart started racing, and I felt a knot of fear tighten in my chest. I stood up quickly, shining my flashlight around, trying to see if there was any sign of Jake. That's when I saw the footprints. They were faint, almost washed away by the rain, but they were there, leading deeper into the woods. And they weren't Jake's. They were bigger, heavier, and spaced further apart. I followed them, my pulse pounding in my ears, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The drag marks and the footprints led deeper into the forest, off the path we'd come in on. I called out for Jake again, but the sound of the rain swallowed my voice. As I went farther in, I found something that made my blood run cold. One of Jake's gloves, lying in the mud, soaked and dirty. I picked it up, my hand shaking. He wouldn't have just dropped it, not out here, not in this weather. I looked around, shining my light in every direction, but there was no sign of him. Just more of those footprints heading deeper into the forest. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to turn back, go back to the campsite and wait, or call for help. But there was no cell service out here, and the thought of leaving Jake out there, wherever he was, made me keep moving forward. The forest felt different now, more threatening. The trees loomed over me, and every sound, every crack of a branch, every gust of wind made me jump. I kept following the tracks, but they were getting harder to see. The rain was washing them away faster now, and I knew that soon there'd be no sign of them at all. I must have gone another 20 minutes, maybe more, before I came to a small clearing. The drag marks and footprints stopped here, but there was no sign of Jake. No more tracks, no more disturbed earth. Nothing. Just empty, dark woods all around me, the rain still pouring down. I stood there, shining my flashlight around, trying to find something, anything that would tell me where he'd gone. But there was nothing. It was like he'd vanished. The fear that had been creeping up on me the whole time finally hit me full force. My mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. I thought about calling out again, but the words caught in my throat. Whoever or whatever had taken him might still be out there, and I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually, I turned around and started walking back the way I'd come. I kept looking over my shoulder, shining my flashlight into the trees, expecting to see something or someone following me. But there was nothing. Just the rain and the dark. When I finally made it back to the campsite, the fire was completely out, just a wet pile of ash and wood. The tent was soaked, water pooling inside from where the rain had leaked through. I sat down on one of the camping chairs, my mind racing. I had no idea what to do. I couldn't stay here, not after what I'd seen, but I couldn't leave Jake either. I waited for a few hours, hoping he'd come back, hoping he'd just show up out of the woods like nothing had happened. But he never did. The rain kept falling, the woods stayed quiet, and I sat there, terrified, not knowing what to do. When the sun finally started to rise, I packed up as much as I could and hiked out. I made it back to the car, soaked and freezing, and drove to the nearest town to call the police. They searched the area, but they didn't find anything. No sign of Jake, no sign of the footprints or drag marks. It was like he'd just disappeared. It's been months now, and they still haven't found him. No one knows what happened that night, and I don't think anyone ever will. But I do. Something or someone took him, and whatever it wasn't an accident. It was late, probably around 10 or so, and the rain had been coming down in sheets for the past hour. I had been driving on the highway for what felt like forever, trying to get home from visiting my sister. The rain was making it hard to see, and the headlights of the oncoming cars reflected off the wet road, making it even harder to focus. I was tired, my eyes felt heavy, and I knew I needed a break. When I saw the sign for a rest stop coming up, I figured I'd pull over, wait out the worst of the storm, and stretch my legs a bit. The rest stop was nearly empty when I pulled in. There were only a few cars scattered around, most of them parked far from where I decided to pull in. I parked under one of the dim streetlights, hoping the rain might let up soon. The rain hitting the roof of the car was loud, almost deafening, and the wind was making the trees sway violently. I could barely see beyond the blurry windshield. I sat there for a few minutes, the engine off, just listening to the storm. That's when I noticed a flickering light from the back of my car. I turned in my seat and saw my taillight blinking on and off, like it was struggling to stay lit. Great. I'd known it was acting up, but now it looked like it was just about done for. I wasn't in the mood to deal with it, especially not in the middle of a storm. I figured I'd get it fixed when I got home, but for now, I just wanted to wait out the rain and get back on the road. I leaned back in my seat and closed my eyes for a moment, trying to relax, but after a couple of minutes, I saw movement in the side mirror. A man was walking toward my car from across the lot. At first, I didn't think much of it, just someone stretching their legs or maybe heading toward the restrooms. But then he stopped right by my car, tapping on the window, water dripping from his jacket and hat. I cracked the window just a bit, enough to hear him but not enough for the rain to come pouring in. "Hey there," he said, his voice friendly, almost too friendly for the situation. "Saw your taillights out. You want some help with that?" His face was mostly hidden by his hat, but what I could see of him looked like any regular guy, maybe in his late 40s or 50s. He was smiling, though the rain made it hard to tell how sincere that smile really was. I hesitated for a second. I didn't want to be rude, but something about the way he just appeared out of nowhere didn't sit right with me. "Thanks, but I'm good," I said, keeping my voice polite but firm. "I'll get it fixed later." He didn't move. Just kept standing there, the rain soaking him through, dripping off his coat. His smile didn't drop, but there was a change in his expression, something subtle, like he didn't like my answer. "Come on, it'll only take a second," he insisted, stepping closer to the window. "I've got tools in my truck. I can fix it right up for you. You don't want to be driving around with a broken taillight in this weather." Again, I shook my head. "Really, I'm fine," I said, starting to feel a little uneasy. "I'm not going far, anyway." He stood there for a second, just staring at me. The rain was coming down harder, and I could hear it splashing around his feet. He didn't move, didn't say anything at first, just stood there, looking at me through the crack in the window. His smile was still there, but it felt different now, forced, almost. "You sure?" he asked, his tone shifting, just a little. The friendly edge was gone, replaced by something else. "It's not safe, you know. A lot of bad people on the road at night." That made my stomach twist. Something in his voice sent a cold shiver down my spine. I didn't know what his deal was, but I wasn't about to open the door or let him anywhere near me. I nodded quickly, trying to stay calm, even though my heart was starting to race. "I'm sure," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I'll be fine." He stayed there, just standing in the rain, staring at me through the small opening in the window. For a moment, I thought he might walk away, but then he leaned down, closer to the window, and I could see his eyes clearly now, cold and calculating. "You don't want my help?" he asked, his voice low now, almost a whisper. "No," I said, more forcefully this time. "Please leave." The smile finally dropped. His face hardened, and he straightened up, stepping back from the car. For a second, I thought that was it, that he'd just walk away and leave me alone. But instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something, a wrench, or maybe a crowbar, I couldn't tell through the rain. He gripped it tightly, his knuckles white, and took another step toward the car. I didn't wait to see what he was planning to do. I slammed the window shut and locked the doors, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear anything else. He banged on the window once, hard, but I didn't look at him. I started the car, my hands still shaking, and threw it into reverse. As I backed out, I caught a glimpse of him in the rearview mirror, standing in the rain, watching me. He didn't follow, didn't run after the car, just stood there, holding whatever tool he had in his hand, staring as I sped out of the parking lot and back onto the highway. My hands were gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles hurt, and I couldn't stop glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights chasing me down the road. But there was nothing, just the rain and the dark, empty highway stretching out in front of me. I didn't stop again until I reached a gas station about 30 miles down the road. I pulled into the lot, parked under the bright lights, and just sat there for a while, trying to calm down. My heart was still racing, my hands shaking on the wheel. I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way his smile had vanished, the way he'd stood there in the rain, gripping that wrench like he was ready to use it. I don't know what he wanted, and I don't think I ever will. But I do know one thing, I wasn't waiting around to find out. I had been hiking for a few hours when the storm hit. It wasn't supposed to rain, or at least, not like this. The forecast had said light showers, but the sky had turned dark fast, and the rain came down in sheets, soaking me before I could even get my jacket on. I was alone, miles into the woods, no cell service, and the trail I was following had all but disappeared in the mud. I had been trying to follow it back toward where I'd parked, but after a while, I realized I'd gotten turned around. The wind was howling through the trees, and the rain was so loud I could barely hear myself think. Everything around me looked the same, just tall, shadowy trees and thick undergrowth. I was completely soaked, my boots sliding in the mud, and the light was fading fast. I knew I had to get out of there soon, or I'd be stuck in the dark with no idea which way was out. I don't know how long I wandered before I saw him. A man, just standing there off the trail, as if he was waiting for something or someone. He was wearing an old, torn jacket and a white-brimmed hat that was drenched, hanging low over his face. His clothes were muddy, like he'd been out in the rain for a long time. At first, I wasn't sure if he was real or just my mind playing tricks on me, but then he looked up, noticed me, and started walking over. I felt relieved at first. What were the chances of running into someone out here, in the middle of a storm? Maybe he was a local, or another hiker who knew the area better than I did. I waved, trying not to seem too desperate, but inside, I was panicking. "Hey!" I shouted over the rain, trying to be heard. "I think I'm lost. Do you know how to get back to the parking lot?" He didn't answer right away. He just stood there for a moment, looking at me through the rain, as if he was sizing me up. Then he gave a slow nod. "Yeah, I know the way," he said, his voice rough, barely audible over the storm. "You're not too far off. I can show you." I was so relieved I didn't even stop to think about how strange it was that he was out here, alone, in the middle of a storm like this. I figured he knew the woods well, maybe lived nearby. Without any other options, I started following him. He didn't talk much, just pointed ahead and started walking deeper into the woods. I tried to keep up, but the mud was making it hard, and the rain was still coming down hard. The more we walked, the less familiar the surroundings became. It was getting darker, the trees around us thicker, and I started to feel that creeping sensation in the back of my mind that something wasn't right. I tried to shake it off. Maybe this was a shortcut I didn't know about. Maybe he was leading me to a road I hadn't seen. But I couldn't ignore the growing feeling of unease. "So, how far is it?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my heart was starting to race. "Not much farther," he said, his voice flat, without looking back at me. We walked for another 10 minutes, and I was getting more and more anxious with each step. The trees were closing in, the rain making it almost impossible to see where we were going. I couldn't hear anything but the storm, and the path we were on, if you could even call it that, was barely visible through the mud and overgrowth. Then, without warning, he stopped. He turned around to face me, and something in his eyes made my stomach drop. His face was pale, his eyes dark and narrow, and the way he looked at me, it wasn't the look of someone trying to help. "You sure you're headed the right way?" I asked, my voice shaky now, trying to hide the panic rising in my throat. He didn't answer right away. He just stood there, staring at me. Then, slowly, he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile, it was cold, almost mocking. "I told you," he said, his voice low and rough. "It's not far." But there was something in his tone that chilled me to the bone. I realized then, in that moment, that I'd made a huge mistake. He wasn't leading me out of the woods. He wasn't trying to help. He had brought me deeper into the forest, away from any trail, any sign of people. We were completely alone. I took a step back, my heart pounding in my chest. "I think I can find my own way from here," I said, trying to sound calm, though my voice was shaking. His smile didn't falter. He just stood there, watching me. The rain kept pouring down, the wind howling through the trees. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he took a step toward me. I backed up, slipping in the mud, my heart racing. My mind was screaming at me to run, but my body felt frozen, locked in place. He took another step, his smile widening, his eyes locked on mine. I don't know how, but I managed to move. I turned and ran, my feet slipping in the mud, branches whipping in my face and arms as I pushed through the undergrowth. The rain made it hard to see, and I stumbled more than once, falling into the mud, scrambling to get back up. I didn't know where I was going, just away from him, as far and as fast as I could. Behind me, I could hear him. He wasn't running, not yet, but I could hear his footsteps, steady and deliberate, following me. He wasn't in a hurry. He knew I was lost. He knew I had nowhere to go. I kept running, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in pain. The woods seemed to go on forever, endless, with no sign of the trail, no sign of escape. The rain was so heavy now that it felt like I was running through a wall of water, my clothes sticking to me, weighing me down. I tripped again, crashing hard into the mud. My flashlight slipped from my hand and rolled away, the beam flickering in the storm. I scrambled to my feet, but when I looked around, I couldn't see him anymore. The trees around me were dark, shadows shifting in the wind, but he was gone. For a second, I thought maybe I'd lost him. Maybe he'd given up, or maybe I'd gone far enough to get away. But then, I heard it, his voice, low and mocking, cutting through the rain. "You can't hide." It was close. Too close. I grabbed my flashlight, my hand shaking so badly I could barely hold it, and started running again. I didn't care where I was going anymore, as long as it was away from him. I could hear him behind me, the sound of his footsteps crunching through the wet leaves, getting closer, faster now. Then, through the trees, I saw it light. Faint, but unmistakable. I didn't think. I just ran toward it, my legs burning, my breath coming in ragged gasps. As I got closer, I saw what it was, an old cabin, barely visible through the rain and trees. I ran to it, not caring who or what was inside, just desperate to get away from him. I reached the door, pounded on it, screaming for help. No one answered. My heart was pounding in my ears, drowning out everything else. I tried the handle, it was locked. I turned around, my back against the door, and saw him. He was standing just at the edge of the trees, his smile gone now, replaced with something darker, something colder. He didn't move, just stared at me from the shadows. I don't know how long we stood there, the rain pouring down, the wind howling through the trees. But eventually, he turned and walked back into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. I stayed there, pressed against the door, shaking, soaked, until the storm finally passed. When I was sure he was gone, I ran. I don't even remember how I found my way back, but somehow, I did. When I finally made it back to my car, I drove straight home, not stopping for anything. It was late, maybe close to midnight, and the rain had picked up again. I just finished my shift at the mall, one of those long days where you're on your feet the whole time. By the time I clocked out, the place was almost completely empty. Most of the stores had closed hours ago, and only a few stragglers were left, hurrying through the rain to their cars. The parking lot was nearly deserted, the overhead lights casting long shadows on the wet pavement. My car was parked a few rows back, near the edge of the lot. It's not like I had much choice. By the time I got to work, the closer spots were already taken. I had my head up, trying to keep my head dry, but the rain was relentless, coming down in sheets. My shoes squelched with every step, and I could feel the cold seeping in. That's when I saw it. There was a car parked a few spaces away from mine, an old, beat-up sedan. I hadn't noticed it before, but the lights were off, and the windows were fogged up. It didn't look like anyone was inside at first, but as I got closer to my car, I realized there was a man sitting in the driver's seat. He wasn't doing anything, just sitting there, staring straight ahead. His face wasn't fully visible through the rain and the fogged-up window, but I could feel his eyes on me. I tried not to look at him directly. I've worked late shifts before, and weird stuff happens sometimes. People fall asleep in their cars, or they're just waiting for someone. No big deal. But something about this guy, I don't know, it made me uneasy. The way he just sat there, not moving, not even pretending to check his phone or do something normal. Just watching. I quickened my pace, pulling my keys from my pocket and unlocking my car with a beep. The sound echoed through the empty lot, louder than I expected. I opened the door and slid into the driver's seat, locking the doors immediately, my hands shaking a bit more than they should have been. I told myself it was just a cold. For a moment, I just sat there, breathing, trying to calm down. The rain pounded on the roof of the car, drowning out everything else. I glanced over at the sedan again, and this time, the man was looking right at me. Our eyes met through the rain-spattered windshield, and I felt a chill run down my spine. His face was blank, no expression, no movement. Just staring. I turned the key in the ignition, and the engine sputtered to life. My wiper started up, sweeping the rain off the windshield, but every few seconds, I'd catch a glimpse of him still sitting there, watching me. I pulled out of the parking spot, slowly at first, keeping my eyes on the road in front of me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As I turned toward the exit of the lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The headlights of the sedan flickered on. My heart skipped a beat. He was following me. I tried to tell myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe he was leaving at the same time as me. But as I pulled onto the road, I saw his car pull out right behind mine. The staying close but not too close, his headlights cutting through the rain in my mirror. I could feel my hands tightening on the wheel, my pulse quickening. I wasn't going to panic, not yet. Maybe he was just heading in the same direction. The rain was coming down harder now, and the roads were slick. I turned onto the main road, hoping that he'd keep going, but he didn't. He stayed behind me, following every turn, his headlights steady in my mirror. I could barely see through the downpour, but I knew he was there. Every time I glanced up, those lights were right behind me, not backing off. I was starting to get scared now. I hadn't even gone that far, just a few miles from the mall, and there was no reason for him to still be following me. I made a sharp turn onto a side street, hoping maybe I could lose him, but his car followed right behind, matching my every move. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my mind raced. Should I drive faster? Call the police? I didn't want to overreact, but this wasn't normal. I didn't know what he wanted, but I wasn't going to wait around to find out. I took another turn, this time onto a back road I didn't normally take. The rain made it hard to see, the wipers barely able to keep up, but I kept going, hoping to lose him in the maze of streets. But he stayed right there, his headlights cutting through the storm like a pair of eyes, never leaving me. I hit the gas, my tires skidding slightly on the wet road, and made another sharp turn, my heart racing faster with each passing second. The street was narrower here, barely lit by the streetlights, and the rain made everything look distorted. I could feel the panic rising in my chest. I had to get away. I made another turn, this one down a residential street, hoping the houses and narrow roads might slow him down. I was driving faster now, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. I checked the mirror again, his headlights were still there, closer now, following every twist and turn I made. There was no way this was a coincidence anymore. I wasn't sure what to do. The roads were empty, no one was out in this weather, and I didn't want to lead him to my house. I thought about pulling into a driveway, acting like I lived there, but what if he stopped too? What if he got out of the car? I took a sharp right, my tires squealing on the wet pavement, and sped down another street. I had no idea where I was going anymore, just trying to put distance between us. But he kept following, closer now, his headlights bright in my mirror, almost blinding. Then, out of nowhere, I saw it, a gas station up ahead, its lights glowing through the rain. Without thinking, I swerved into the parking lot, skidding slightly as I pulled up to one of the pumps. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my phone. The sedan slowed as it passed the gas station, its headlights sweeping across the lot, but it didn't pull in. It kept going, driving slowly down the road until it disappeared into the rain. I sat there for a moment, trying to catch my breath, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they hurt. I looked around, half expecting him to circle back, but the lot was empty. The rain was still pouring down, and the wipers thudded rhythmically against the windshield, but there was no sign of him. I didn't move for a long time, just sat there in the car, watching the rain fall. My heart was still racing, adrenaline pumping through me, but I was safe. He was gone. Eventually, when I was sure he wasn't coming back, I pulled out of the gas station and took the long way home, making sure to check my mirrors the whole time. There was no one behind me. I was walking home late last night. It had been raining since the afternoon, and I just wanted to get back as quickly as possible. My usual route takes me along the main road, but I decided to cut through the woods. I knew it was a bad idea, but it would shave off at least 10 minutes, and with the rain coming down harder, I didn't want to be out there longer than I had to. I've taken that path before, but only during the day. At night, The woods felt different, quieter, darker, and much harder to see through with the rain blocking everything. I hadn't walked more than 5 minutes when I saw it, an old house I'd never noticed before. It wasn't like a creepy, rundown place you see in movies, just a small, one-story house with chipped paint and dark windows. What caught my attention was the light coming from inside. One window was lit up, glowing faintly through the rain. It was strange because I thought I knew this area pretty well. I didn't remember ever seeing a house this deep into the woods, and it didn't look like a place someone would still be living in. I hesitated for a second, wondering if I should keep walking. But then my curiosity got the better of me. I figured maybe someone was just squatting there, trying to stay out of the rain like I was. I approached the house, feeling a bit nervous. The closer I got, the more I could see that it wasn't in the best shape. The front porch was sagging, and the roof looked like it had seen better days. But the light in the window was real, and someone was definitely inside. I knocked on the door, feeling the rain soaking through my jacket. There was a pause, no sound from inside, and for a second, I thought maybe no one would answer. Then I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming toward the door. It creaked open just a crack, and I saw a man standing there. He was older, maybe in his late 50s or early 60s, with thin gray hair and a pale face. He stared at me for a moment, like he wasn't expecting to see anyone. His clothes were a bit too clean, considering the state of the house. Just a plain sweater and jeans, nothing that stood out, but it didn't match the rest of the place. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice low and flat. I told him I was just trying to get home and had taken the shortcut through the woods. I said I saw the light and thought I'd stop by, maybe ask for directions or a place to wait out the rain for a few minutes. He didn't answer right away, just stared at me, his eyes kind of distant. Then he nodded and stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in," he said, almost too casually, like he'd been expecting me. I stepped inside, wiping the rain off my face. The house was warmer than I expected, and the smell hit me right away, a faint musty odor, like the place hadn't been aired out in a long time. The room was simple, just a small living area with a couple of old chairs and a table. A single lamp lit the room, casting long shadows on the walls. The man closed the door behind me, the sound of the rain muffling as soon as it shut. He walked past me and sat down in one of the chairs, motioning for me to sit in the other. I sat down, feeling uneasy but trying not to show it. "Do you live here alone?" I asked, trying to make conversation. He nodded slowly. "For years now," he said. "No one comes out here much." His voice had this strange, emotionless tone. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. He didn't seem bothered that a stranger had just shown up at his door in the middle of the night. In fact, he seemed almost too calm about it. Like he was used to it, which didn't make sense for someone living alone in the woods. "Are you waiting for someone?" I asked. It just felt odd that the house was in such bad shape, but he was sitting there like it was the most normal thing in the world. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No," he said, "just been living here. Quiet, peaceful. Hard to leave once you get used to it." There was something off about the way he said that. Like he was trying to convince himself more than me. I glanced around the room, looking for signs that anyone else might be there, but it was just us. The silence was thick, the rain outside the only sound breaking it. He didn't ask me any questions, didn't seem curious about why I was out there, soaking wet, in the middle of the night. That's what got me. It was like he didn't care at all. I shifted in my seat, glancing toward the door. I started thinking that maybe I should leave. I thanked him for letting me in and said I should probably get going. His eyes flicked toward the door, and for the first time since I'd arrived, his expression changed. It wasn't much, just a small tightening around his mouth, but it made my stomach drop. "Stay a bit longer," he said, his voice low but firm. "It's not safe out there in the rain." His words were casual, but the way he said them felt like a command. My heart started racing. I didn't know why, but I could feel something wasn't right. The way he was watching me, how he didn't blink as he spoke, made me feel trapped. I stood up, trying to keep my voice steady. "I really need to get home," I said, forcing a smile. "Thanks again for the shelter, but I should go." He didn't move from his chair, just kept watching me. The smile he'd given earlier was gone now. His eyes seemed darker, more focused on me. I reached for the door, my hand trembling slightly as I turned the knob. "Careful out there," he said softly, almost like a warning. I pulled the door open and stepped outside, feeling the cold rain hit me like a slap. The relief I felt being out of that house was immediate, but I could still feel his eyes on me. I didn't look back, just started walking, my feet splashing through the muddy ground as I hurried away. But as I moved deeper into the woods, something nagged at me. It wasn't just his behavior, though that had been unsettling enough. It was that house. It hadn't looked like a place someone had been living in for years. There was no sign of personal belongings, no clutter, nothing that said home. It felt more like a waiting room. I walked faster, the rain soaking through my clothes again, the path barely visible in the darkness. The house was behind me now, but the feeling of unease wouldn't go away. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see him following me. But there was nothing, just the rain and the trees, stretching on endlessly. Finally, after what felt like hours, I saw the lights of the main road ahead. Relief washed over me as I stepped out of the woods, my body trembling with a mix of cold and fear. I didn't stop walking until I was back at my house, locking the door behind me and leaning against it, trying to catch my breath. I don't know what that man wanted or why he was so calm about everything, but I'm sure of one thing, something was wrong in that house. And whatever it was, I'm glad I got out when I did. I wasn't planning to hike that far that day, and I definitely wasn't planning to get caught in the rain. It was one of those days that started off nice, just cloudy enough to keep things cool but not look threatening. So, I didn't bring any gear with me. No raincoat, no extra water, just me, my phone, and a small backpack with a granola bar. I figured I'd be out for a couple of hours, tops. I started up the trail around noon. It wasn't a popular one, which I liked. I hadn't passed many people, maybe one or two earlier on, but then I was on my own. I wanted the quiet. But by the time I realized I had wandered farther than I planned, I also realized I had no idea where I was. It wasn't like I was completely lost at first. I thought I could just backtrack. The path was pretty clear, just winding enough that I figured I'd recognize the way back once I started walking. But then the sky turned dark. Not the gradual way you'd expect, but like someone had flipped a switch. The wind picked up, and before I knew it, the rain started. It was heavy, cold, and it came down fast. My first thought was to keep walking. Find shelter somewhere until it passed. But there was nothing around me. Just trees and rocks and mud. I pulled out my phone to check the map, but, of course, no signal. The rain got worse, and the ground was turning into a mess beneath my boots, so I tried to pick up my pace. That's when I realized how completely turned around I was. Every step felt like I was getting deeper into the woods. I don't know how long I walked, but it felt like hours. I was drenched, cold, and starting to panic. I knew I couldn't stay out there much longer. I was losing daylight, and everything looked the same. My phone was useless, and I was starting to think I might have to spend the night out there. That's when I saw them. A man and a woman, walking toward me from the other direction. They didn't have any hiking gear either, which struck me as weird because they were just as soaked as I was. But in that moment, I didn't care. I was just relieved to see people. "Hey!" I called out, waving. They saw me and stopped, waiting for me to reach them. The man spoke first. He had short brown hair, wet and stuck to his forehead, and he looked like he was in his late 30s, maybe early 40s. "You all right?" he asked. "I got turned around in the rain," I said. "I'm trying to get back to the main trail. Do you know the way?" The woman, standing next to him, smiled. She was shorter than him, with long, dark hair, also drenched. "Yeah, we do," she said. "We were just heading that way. You can come with us." I felt a huge wave of relief. "Thank you," I said. I was really starting to freak out. They didn't say anything else, just started walking, and I fell in step behind them. The rain wasn't letting up, and the trail we were on seemed just as unfamiliar as everything else around me. But I trusted them. They looked like they knew where they were going. We walked in silence for a while. The only sound was the rain and the squishing of our boots in the mud. After a few minutes, I started noticing things that made me uncomfortable. The couple wasn't talking to each other. They weren't even looking around like they were navigating. Just walking, straight ahead, without saying a word. I tried to shake it off. They were probably just focused on getting out of the rain, like me. But then the woman glanced back at me. It wasn't a quick look, she held my gaze for a second too long. Her smile was gone, and her expression was completely blank. It sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the cold. "Is it much farther?" I asked, my voice sounding shaky even to me. The man answered without turning around. "Not too far." Something about the way he said it made my stomach knot up. I glanced at my phone again, but it was still useless. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. We kept walking, and I realized that the trail we were on was heading deeper into the woods, not out. I couldn't tell exactly where we were, but it didn't feel like we were heading back toward anything familiar. I slowed down a bit, falling behind them just enough to put some distance between us. The woman glanced back again, and this time her expression wasn't blank. She looked expectant, like she was waiting for something. My heart started racing, and I knew I had to make a decision. I cleared my throat. "You know what? I think I'll just head back on my own. I might have missed a turn earlier." The man stopped walking and turned around. His eyes were different now, too narrowed, like he was sizing me up. "It's not safe to go alone," he said. "You're better off sticking with us." There was something in his voice that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't a suggestion. It was more like a warning. But everything in me was screaming to get away. I forced a smile. "I'll be fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thanks for the help." The woman stepped closer to me, her smile back, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Come on," she said softly. "We'll take care of you." That's when I knew I had to get out of there. I didn't say another word. I just turned and started walking as fast as I could without breaking into a run. My heart was pounding, and I could hear them behind me, still walking, but slower now. Like they weren't in any rush to catch up. Like they knew I had nowhere to go. The rain was pouring down harder now, and the trail was slick with mud. I kept walking, trying to keep my breathing steady, but every instinct I had was screaming at me to run. I couldn't hear them anymore, but I didn't dare look back. I just kept moving, pushing through the rain, trying to focus on finding my way out. I don't know how long I walked, but eventually, I saw something up ahead, a break in the trees. I picked up my pace, practically running now, and when I reached the clearing, I nearly cried with relief. It was the main trail. I recognized the signs, the path leading back toward the parking lot. I didn't stop. I kept walking, faster now, until I could see the lights from the trailhead up ahead. I glanced back once, just to make sure, and saw nothing behind me but the empty trail in the rain. When I finally reached my car, I was shaking so badly I could barely get the key into the lock. I jumped in, locked the doors, and sat there for a minute, trying to calm down. My clothes were soaked through, and my heart was still racing, but I was safe. I started the car and pulled out of the lot, glancing in my rearview mirror one last time. They weren't there. The trail was empty, but I knew I had made the right choice. It was late, around midnight, and the rain was coming down hard. I just finished a long shift at work, and all I wanted was to get home, eat something, and pass out. The drive wasn't supposed to be that long, maybe 30 minutes on the highway and then a few side roads through the countryside. That night, though, the weather was making everything worse. The rain was so heavy I could barely see a few feet in front of me, even with the wipers going full blast. I was on one of those side roads, out in the middle of nowhere, when I saw a tree had come down, blocking the entire road. It must have been the storm that brought it down because it didn't look like it had been there long. There were no other cars, no lights anywhere. Just me, stuck in the dark with the rain pouring down and a massive tree trunk lying across the road. I stopped the car and sat there for a minute, hoping there might be some way around it. But the tree was huge, covering both lanes, and there wasn't enough room to squeeze by on either side. I thought about trying to backtrack, but the road was narrow, and with the rain, I wasn't sure how far I'd have to go to find another way home. My phone had no signal, typical for that area, so calling for help wasn't an option. I was debating whether I should try getting out of the car to see if I could move some of the smaller branches when I saw headlights coming up behind me. A truck. It pulled up slowly and stopped a few feet behind my car, its high beams cutting through the rain. At first, I felt relieved. Maybe they had a chainsaw or something in the back, and we could get the tree out of the way. Two guys got out of the truck, both wearing hooded jackets, the kind you'd wear if you were working outside in bad weather. They didn't seem in any rush, though. They walked up to my window slowly, and something about that felt off to me right away. I rolled the window down just a crack. "Hey," I said, trying to sound normal. "Looks like the storm brought down a tree. Do you guys have anything to move it?" The taller of the two men leaned down, and I could see his face in the dim light from my car. He looked like he was in his 40s, maybe older. His face was hard to read, his eyes shadowed by the brim of his hood. He glanced at the tree and then back at me. "Nah, we don't have anything for that," he said, his voice slow and calm. "But we can give you a ride." That's when I felt it, this sudden knot of unease in my stomach. The way he said it, it wasn't really an offer. It felt like he was telling me I didn't have a choice. The other guy, shorter and stockier, didn't say anything. He just stood there, looking at me, his hands stuffed in the pockets of his jacket. I shook my head. "No, I'm good. I'll figure something out. Thanks, though." The taller man straightened up, and I thought he might just walk away, but instead, he stayed there, standing right by my door. "It's raining pretty hard out here," he said, his voice still calm but with an edge now. "You don't want to be stuck out here all night. Come with us. We'll get you somewhere dry." My heart started pounding, and I could feel the adrenaline kicking in. Something about these guys wasn't right. I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw their truck still sitting there, its engine running, the headlights casting long shadows across the road. "I'll wait for a tow truck," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've got roadside assistance." The shorter guy finally spoke up. His voice was gruff, almost annoyed. "No one's coming out here in this storm. You're wasting time. Just get out of the car." That's when I realized they weren't trying to help. I don't know what their plan was, but it wasn't good. My hand instinctively went to the lock on the door, making sure it was secure, and I reached for the gear shift, ready to put the car in reverse if I needed to. The tall guy must have seen me move because he stepped closer, his hand resting on the door frame. "Listen," he said, his voice lower now, "we're not asking. Get out of the car." My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do. If I stayed in the car, they could easily break the window or force the door open. But if I got out, who knows what they'd do? I couldn't risk it. I wasn't going with them. I didn't say anything. I just slammed the car into reverse and hit the gas. The tires spun in the mud for a second before they caught, and the car lurched backward. The guys jumped back, probably not expecting me to take off like that, and I swerved, trying to turn the car around in the narrow road. The headlights from their truck lit up the trees around me as I fought to get control of the car. That's when I saw the tall guy run back to their truck. He shouted something to the other guy, but I couldn't hear what. My car was halfway turned around, the back end skidding on the wet road, when their truck's headlights suddenly went dark. They'd shut off the lights. Panic hit me full force. I couldn't see them anymore. I didn't know if they were coming after me on foot or if they were trying to cut me off with their truck. My car finally straightened out, and I slammed my foot on the gas, speeding down the road in the direction I'd come from. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the wheel, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The rain was still pouring down, making it hard to see, but I kept going, praying I wouldn't hit another downed tree or skid off the road. Every time I glanced in the rearview mirror, I expected to see their truck's headlights coming after me, but there was nothing. Just the rain and the dark road stretching out behind me. After what felt like forever, I finally reached a more populated area, where the road was wider, and there were a few scattered houses. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station that was still open. I pulled in, parked under the awning, and just sat there, my heart still racing, my mind trying to catch up with what had just happened. I didn't know if they followed me or if they'd given up, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to find out. I got out of the car and ran inside the gas station, soaking wet and shaking, but grateful to be around other people again. I stayed there for a while, just waiting for my heart to calm down, before finally heading home. I don't know what those guys wanted, but I'm sure it wasn't good. I keep thinking about what would have happened if I'd gotten out of the car, if I'd gone with them like they wanted. I try not to dwell on it too much, but the thought still creeps in sometimes, especially when I'm driving alone at night. I haven't taken that road since. I don't think I ever will again. It was pouring outside, a heavy rain that had been going on for hours. I remember how loud it was, the kind of rain that makes you feel trapped, like the whole world is covered in water. I had just gotten home from work, soaked to the bone, and was looking forward to nothing more than changing into something dry and curling up in front of the TV. The house felt empty, quiet except for the rain hammering against the windows and the roof. I had just settled in when I thought I heard something strange. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just a storm. Rain can make things sound weird, like creaks and groans that aren't really there. But then I heard it again, this scraping noise. It wasn't the rain. It was coming from the garage. I froze for a second, listening hard. The sound wasn't consistent, more like something or someone moving around in there. My heart started to race, but I tried to tell myself it was nothing. Maybe the wind or something had fallen over. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I stood up, grabbed my phone, and made my way toward the door that led to the garage. As soon as I opened the door, the sound got louder. I flicked on the garage light, expecting to see something knocked over, maybe a stray animal that had gotten in. But when I stepped into the garage, I saw him. A man. He was crouched behind my car, trying to stay out of sight. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. He didn't move right away, but I could see him, his clothes soaked from the rain, his hands gripping something. I thought it was a tool at first, but then I realized it was a knife. For a second, neither of us said anything. We just stood there, staring at each other. My mind was racing, trying to process what I was seeing, trying to figure out what to do. He didn't look like some homeless guy who'd come in to get out of the storm. He looked rough, disheveled, and there was this intensity in his eyes, like he wasn't just hiding. He was waiting. I wanted to scream, to run, but I didn't. I didn't want to do anything that would set him off. Instead, I swallowed hard and asked, "What are you doing in here?" My voice sounded more confident than I felt. He straightened up slowly, the knife still in his hand, but he didn't raise it. Not yet. "I needed to get out of the rain," he said, his voice low and calm, like he wasn't standing in my garage with a weapon in his hand. Like it was normal. "I didn't mean to scare you." I didn't believe him for a second. There was no reason for him to be in my garage. He could have knocked on the door if he needed help. But he hadn't done that. He'd snuck in, and now he was holding a knife. I took a small step back, trying not to let him see how scared I was. "You need to leave," I said, my voice shaking a little now. "I'm going to call the police." He didn't move. His eyes flicked to my phone, still in my hand, but he didn't seem worried. "You don't need to do that," he said. "I'm not here to hurt you." But the way he said it made me feel the exact opposite. He was too calm, too sure of himself. He didn't look like someone who was afraid of getting caught. I knew then that he wasn't just waiting out the rain. He had a plan, and I was a part of it. I took another step back, edging toward the door. "You need to leave. Now." He took a step forward, closing the distance between us, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice cold now. "Not until I get what I came for." I didn't know what he meant, and I didn't want to find out. My hand tightened around the phone, and without thinking, I hit the emergency call button. He saw what I was doing and lunged forward, his hand with the knife coming up fast. I stumbled backward, slamming the door between us just in time. I heard the knife hit the wood as I scrambled to lock it. I fumbled with the lock for what felt like forever, my hand shaking so badly I could barely get it to turn. Finally, the lock clicked into place, and I backed away, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I could hear him pounding on the door, trying to get in, but the door was solid. He wasn't getting through, not easily anyway. I backed up into the kitchen, still clutching my phone. I could hear the operator on the other end asking if I needed help, but I couldn't even speak. I was too focused on the door, waiting for it to burst open. After a few seconds, the pounding stopped, and everything went quiet. I stayed where I was, frozen, listening. I couldn't hear him anymore. I didn't know if he'd left or if he was waiting, trying to find another way in. The house felt too big all of a sudden, too many doors, too many windows. I forced myself to speak into the phone, telling the operator what had happened, that someone was in my garage, that he had a knife. They told me to stay on the line, that police were on their way, but every second felt like an hour. I heard something then, something outside. Footsteps, and then the sound of the garage door creaking open. He was leaving. I crept toward the front window and peeked out, just in time to see him running off into the rain. I couldn't see his face clearly in the dark, but I'll never forget the way he moved, quick and deliberate, like he knew exactly where he was going. The police showed up not long after. They searched the garage, the yard, but they didn't find him. They said it was likely he'd just been trying to get out of the storm, but I know that's not true. He didn't just want shelter. He had a knife, and he wasn't planning on leaving until he got something I don't even want to think about. I've had the locks changed since then, got a security system too. But I still don't feel safe, not really. Every time it rains, I find myself listening for that sound again, that scraping noise in the garage. And every time I walk into my house, I wonder if someone's waiting for me, hiding, just like he was. I decided to take some time off from my busy life, just a weekend alone at a cabin in the woods. I thought it would be nice to disconnect, be away from my phone and the noise of the city. The cabin was small but cozy, surrounded by trees. The sound of rain tapping against the roof added to the peaceful atmosphere. I arrived late in the afternoon, the sky gray with clouds, and by evening, the rain started. I settled in, made a fire, and prepared some simple food. As the night wore on, the wind picked up, howling through the trees, and the rain drummed louder against the roof. I felt warm and safe, the flickering light of the fire casting shadows on the walls. It was just me and the sounds of nature. I could hardly hear anything else over the rain. As I sat in my chair, staring into the flames, I thought I heard a soft knock. It was so faint I almost ignored it. I got up and walked to the door, opening it to find nothing but darkness. The rain poured down, creating a curtain of water. I looked around, but there was no one there. Just the trees swaying in the wind and the sound of the rain. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but I shrugged it off, telling myself it was probably just the wind or my imagination playing tricks on me. I closed the door and returned to my chair by the fire, trying to focus on the warmth and the glow. But a few minutes later, I heard the knock again. This time it was a bit louder. I froze, feeling my heart rate quicken. I got up and opened the door again. The darkness greeted me, the rain still falling, but there was still no one there. I scanned the area, expecting to see someone standing just out of reach, but nothing. It was just the rain, falling hard and heavy. I shut the door again, locking it this time, an uneasy feeling creeping into my stomach. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was a branch hitting the door or something like that. I sat back down, but the silence felt heavy, too quiet after those knocks. I convinced myself that I was just being paranoid, and I tried to distract myself with my book. The pages turned slowly, and my eyes scanned the words without really absorbing them. Then, it happened again, a soft knock, then another. This time, it was more insistent. I got up, anger mixing with fear. I wanted to shout at whoever it was to go away, but instead, I opened the door yet again. The rain poured down in sheets, and still, no one stood outside. I felt a chill run through me, the kind that made me question what was happening. I closed the door quickly, locking it tightly. The knocking continued, growing louder, almost frantic. It was as if someone was pounding on the door, demanding to be let in. My heart raced, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I backed away from the door, unsure of what to do. I should call the police, but would they even come out here in this storm? What could I say? That someone was knocking on my door but was nowhere to be found. The knocking turned into banging. I felt the vibrations travel through the wood, and the sound echoed in my ears. It was relentless, and my mind spiraled. I imagined all sorts of scenarios. What if it was someone in trouble? What if it was a prank? Or worse, what if it was someone with bad intentions? I held my breath, wishing the noise would stop. I decided to grab my phone and try to call for help. As I reached for it, the banging stopped. It was a sudden silence, heavy and oppressive. I hesitated, feeling the air around me thicken. Should I open the door again? Maybe they left. But what if they were still out there, hiding in the shadows? I made my way back to the door, peeking through the window next to it. I saw nothing but darkness, the rain still falling heavily. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a cold sweat forming on my back. I turned around and headed back to my chair, but as soon as I sat down, the knocking started again. It was different this time, almost like it was coming from the windows. I jumped up and looked around, seeing my reflection in the glass. My heart raced faster than ever as I heard the knocking move from one side to the other, rhythmic and frantic. I was not ready for this, not at all. I felt trapped, like I was in some kind of nightmare. Then, I noticed something. There was a shadow outside, just for a split second. My mind raced with possibilities. I couldn't see the face, but it was definitely there, looming close to the window. I stumbled backward, almost falling over the rug in the small living room. The knocking had stopped, but now I was filled with dread, feeling exposed and vulnerable. I decided I needed to stay quiet. I grabbed my phone and texted a friend, hoping they would respond quickly. The battery was low, and the rain rattled harder against the roof. I wondered if they even had service out here. I sent the message anyway. I think someone is trying to get into my cabin. No response. The power flickered, and I felt panic rise in my chest. I could hardly breathe as I waited, hoping someone would answer. The rain continued, but I was too focused on the creeping feeling of dread that enveloped me. I listened closely, but all I heard was the rain and the pounding of my heart. Just as I started to think I might be overreacting, the knocking returned, louder than ever. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't just wait around for something to happen. I grabbed a heavy flashlight from the kitchen and made my way to the front door. I would confront whatever was outside. If I was going to be afraid, I would at least know what I was afraid of. I opened the door wide and stepped out into the rain, holding the flashlight in front of me. The light cut through the darkness, and I scanned the area. I saw nothing but the trees swaying, their branches whipping against one another. I called out, "Is anyone there?" My voice trembled, but I forced myself to sound firm. Silence. Then, I heard a rustle to my left, and I spun around, pointing the flashlight in that direction. I was ready to face whoever was there, but I found only the empty darkness. I called out again, my voice shaking. Who was there? But no answer came. The world felt so empty and quiet, the only sound the relentless rain. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the night, followed by a quick shuffle. I turned to see a figure darting between the trees. My heart dropped. I turned and ran back inside, slamming the door and locking it behind me. I backed away, breathing hard, and turned the light off. I wanted to hide. I moved to the back room, crouching behind the bed. I didn't know if I would be safe there, but I felt like I had no choice. I tried to calm my breathing, listening for any sound, waiting for something to happen. After a long time, I heard footsteps again, softer this time, moving around the cabin. I felt my heart stop. The figure was back. I could hear the sound of breathing, low and ragged, right outside the door. Then, silence. I waited in the dark, trembling, listening for what felt like an eternity. Finally, I heard the sound of rain hitting the roof again, the soft rhythm slowly fading away. The footsteps had stopped, and I dared to peek out from my hiding spot. Nothing. I took a deep breath and stepped back into the main room, the door still shut tight. The rain had calmed, just a steady drizzle now, but I was still filled with fear. I crept to the window, careful not to make a sound. I saw no one outside. I waited and watched, hoping to see the figure again, but the woods remained still and quiet. After what felt like hours, I saw headlights in the distance. I rushed to the door, my heart racing with hope. I opened it just as two flashlights shone in my direction. The police had arrived. They rushed to me, asking if I was okay, and I explained everything that had happened. They searched the area and found no one, but they stayed with me until the rain finally stopped, assuring me that they would keep an eye out for anything suspicious. As the storm subsided, I finally felt a sense of relief wash over me. I realized how alone I had felt in that cabin, how quickly fear had turned my safe space into something terrifying. The officers stayed until I was ready to leave, and I made sure to lock up the cabin tightly before heading home. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me, lurking in the shadows. The memory of those knocks haunted me, and even now, whenever I hear rain tapping against the roof, I remember that night in the cabin and the fear that made me question everything I thought I knew. It was one of those nights when the rain felt like it had a purpose, a relentless downpour that blurred the world outside my car. I had just finished a long day at work and was looking forward to getting home. The roads were slick, and the headlights barely cut through the sheets of water streaming down the windshield. I switched on the wipers to their highest setting, but it hardly helped. As I drove, I felt the tension of the day slowly melting away. Just a few more minutes, I thought, and I would be safe in my warm apartment, listening to the rain outside while I enjoyed a cup of tea. But as I approached the bridge, my car suddenly jolted and sputtered. The engine died without warning, and the dashboard lights flickered off. I pulled to the side, my heart sinking. I tried to restart the engine. Nothing. I turned the key again, but it just clicked, mocking me with its silence. My gut twisted. I was stranded. The bridge loomed above, dark and foreboding, the water rushing beneath it like some wild beast. I reached for my phone to call for help, but of course, no signal. I sighed deeply, leaning back in my seat, trying to calm myself. Minutes passed, and the rain continued to pour. I looked out the window, watching the drops race each other down the glass. The world felt like it had shrunk to just me in this small space. I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I would be okay, that I just needed to wait for someone to pass by. Surely, someone would stop to help. Then I saw headlights approaching in the distance. My heart lifted. The car got closer, and as it passed under the bridge, it slowed down. I felt a rush of hope. I waved my arms, desperate for the driver to see me. The car stopped. But before I could react, I noticed a group of figures emerging from the shadows. They were men, 3 of them, moving toward my car with a casualness that sent a chill down my spine. I rolled the window down a bit, hoping they were there to help. "Hey, you need help?" one of them called, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. "Yes." "My car won't start," I replied, trying to sound calm, but I could hear the tremor in my voice. They approached the car slowly, almost circling it. I could see their faces now, half lit by the headlights and the dull glow of the street lamps. They were grinning, but it didn't feel friendly. It felt predatory. "Let me take a look," the man who had spoken said, now standing close to my window. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I think it's just the battery," I stammered, instinctively locking the doors. One of the other men leaned down and tapped on the window, the sound sharp against the rain. "Come on, it's cold out here. We can help you. Just let us in." I shook my head, panic rising in my throat. "No, thank you. I'll wait for the tow truck." "Suit yourself," the man at the window said, straightening up. The others exchanged glances, and I could feel their eyes boring into me. They were sizing me up, weighing their options. I could not shake the feeling that they were not here to help. I pressed my back against the seat, trying to make myself as small as possible, keeping my eyes fixed on them. The first man leaned closer, trying to peer into the car, and I instinctively flinched away. "Are you alone?" he asked, his tone suddenly more serious. "Please, just go away," I said, my voice trembling. "Come on, just let us help you," another one said, now standing by the rear of the car. "What's the worst that could happen?" I knew they were not asking for permission. I was trapped, and the fear settled in like ice in my veins. I had to think fast. My heart raced as I glanced at my phone again, praying for a miracle, but still nothing. The man at the window raised his hands in mock surrender. "Look, we just want to help. It's dangerous out here, and you're all alone. You never know what might happen. Just let us take a look." I didn't answer, but I could see the shadows of the other men moving closer, their laughter mingling with the sound of the rain. I needed to get out of there. With my hands trembling, I fumbled for the gear shift. I had to try to start the car one more time. I turned the key, but again, the engine only clicked in response. The laughter died down as the men noticed my desperation. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be," one of them said, his voice low and menacing. I pressed down on the horn, hoping someone nearby would hear it. The noise filled the air, echoing against the bridge, and for a moment, the men hesitated, glancing around as if weighing their options. "Just stop," I shouted, my heart racing. "Leave me alone." The man at the window stepped back, his expression shifting from playful to something darker. "Fine. But don't say we didn't warn you." They stepped back from the car, forming a loose circle, eyes fixed on me. I felt the weight of their gazes, a coiling tension in the air. I had to get away. Then, just as I was about to press the gas pedal, the headlights of another car approached, shining bright against the rain. Relief washed over me as I saw it slow down, illuminating the scene. "Hey! What's going on here?" the driver shouted, his voice cutting through the storm. The men immediately turned and backed away from my car, their expressions shifting to something less friendly. I could see them debating among themselves, and in that moment, I knew I had to act. With my heart pounding, I shoved the gear shift into drive and floored it. The tires screeched as I propelled myself forward, splashing through the puddles and towards the safety of the road. I glanced in the rearview mirror as I sped away, watching the three figures shrink into the darkness. I could see the man from earlier still standing there, staring after me, a look of frustration etched across his face. I turned my attention back to the road, gripping the steering wheel tightly. I drove until I reached the nearest gas station, my heart still racing, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I parked in a well-lit area and jumped out, feeling the rain soak my clothes instantly. I ran inside, breathless and shaking, and explained everything to the attendant, who listened wide-eyed as I told my story. He called the police for me, and I waited inside, feeling safe under the fluorescent lights. The reality of what had just happened began to sink in, the fear still clinging to me like the rainwater on my skin. When the officers arrived, they reassured me that I had done the right thing by getting away. They took my statement and promised to check the area. I left the gas station feeling grateful for the help but shaken by the encounter. That night, I learned how quickly safety can turn into danger and how important it is to trust your instincts. Even now, whenever it rains, I cannot help but remember that night, the fear that gripped me as I sat in my car, and the knowledge that I escaped by sheer luck. The night was unusually dark, the rain beating against the windows like 1,000 tiny fists. I sat on the couch, the flickering light of the television the only thing cutting through the gloom. It was just past 8, and the storm outside raged with a ferocity I had not seen in years. I had planned a quiet evening at home after a long week, but the weather had turned into a cacophony that felt almost alive. The wind howled, rattling the glass, and I wrapped myself in a blanket, trying to find comfort in the chaos outside. My phone buzzed occasionally, but it was only messages from friends who had canceled their plans due to the storm. I did not mind the solitude. I felt safe in my little bubble, the storm a distant echo compared to the warmth inside. But then, as I sipped my tea, I heard it, a soft tapping sound. I paused, holding my breath. The sound came again, more distinct this time, and it took me a moment to realize it was coming from the front door. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 9. Who would be out in this weather? I stood up, the blanket sliding from my shoulders. The knocking grew louder, turning into a persistent thump, thump, thump. My heart raced. I approached the door cautiously, peeking through the peephole. My view was distorted, rain blurring the world outside. I could make out a figure, but it was too dark to see any details. Help! Please, the voice called, panic lacing their words. I need to come in. I stepped back, a chill running down my spine. Something about the voice sent alarms ringing in my head. It sounded desperate, but there was an edge to it that made me hesitate. I thought about calling the police, but my phone was charging in the kitchen, and I felt rooted to the spot. Who are you? I asked through the door, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm lost. I need shelter from the storm. Please, just let me in. The voice was frantic now, the pounding becoming more insistent. I shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. I cannot let you in. It is not safe. The banging intensified. You don't understand. I'm going to get soaked. Let me in. I took a step back, fear creeping into my gut. I could hear the desperation in his tone, but something felt off. Why was he out there in such a storm? And why was he not telling me who he was? I said no. I shouted, hoping my firmness would deter him. For a moment, there was silence. My heart pounded in my ears. Had he left? But then I heard it again, louder this time, a heavy fist slamming against the door. Let me in. Please. I'll do anything. The sound echoed in the empty space of my house, and I felt my breath hitch. I was alone, and that realization pressed down on me. The last flicker of warmth from the television felt miles away. The knocking continued, now accompanied by something more soft, low muttering, as if he were talking to himself. I felt a wave of dread wash over me. Please, he shouted again, and I could hear panic in his voice. I can't stay out here. I need to come inside. I edged back towards the kitchen, moving carefully so as not to make a sound. I had a knife there, something to defend myself if it came to that. The muttering grew louder, frantic words mixed with pleas. I could not make out what he was saying, but it only fueled my anxiety. I grabbed my phone, but my hands trembled as I fumbled with it. I needed to call for help, but my mind raced with thoughts. What if he broke in before I could? What if I made the wrong choice? The door rattled violently, the sound like thunder amidst the storm. Let me in. I can't stay out here. In that moment, something snapped inside me. I decided I would not wait for whatever was outside to break in. I hit the emergency button on my phone, my heart pounding as I waited for the call to connect. 911, what is your emergency? The operator's voice broke through the noise. I need help. Someone is trying to break into my house. I whispered, my voice shaky. Stay calm. Are you safe right now? I don't know. They are at my front door. I glanced at the door, the silhouette of the man now pressing against the glass, his face barely visible. I could see his features more clearly now, wet hair clinging to his forehead, eyes wide with desperation. But even through the panic, there was something unsettling in his gaze. Stay on the line with me, the operator said. Help is on the way. Can you lock all your doors and stay away from the windows? Yes. I took a step back, my heart racing as I heard the man's voice again, low and urgent. Let me in. I could feel the walls closing in. The door rattled once more, harder this time, and I heard the unmistakable sound of wood splintering. Please. I am begging you. Let me in. You do not understand what is out here. Just a moment, I said, my voice barely a whisper, but the operator could hear my fear. I took a deep breath and looked for something to defend myself with. I grabbed a kitchen knife, its cool metal feeling reassuring in my palm. Ma'am, are you still there? The operator asked. Yes. I need you to stay quiet. If you can, find a place to hide. My eyes darted around the room. The kitchen was open to the living room. I couldn't hide there. I decided to go into the hallway, or I could shut the bedroom door. Okay, I am going to move, I said, keeping my voice low. Stay on the line. I slipped into the hallway, closing the door behind me, the knife clutched tightly in my hand. I could still hear the rain pounding against the house, drowning out everything except for the man's desperate pleas. You have to let me in, he shouted, the urgency of his voice making my heart race. Why don't you tell me who you are? I called out, trying to sound brave. I just need a place to stay, he shouted back. You do not understand what is out here. Please. I heard the door shudder as he slammed into it again. The wood splintered more, a deep crack forming along the edge. I swear I'll break it down if you do not let me in. My mind raced. I thought of the police. They had to be close. I could hear the sirens faintly in the distance, but they seemed so far away. Help is coming, I said, hoping my voice held steady. You need to leave. No! I cannot go out there. Please. His voice turned frantic, and I could hear the panic rising. The door shook again, and I pressed my back against the wall, the knife ready in my hand. With one last effort, he slammed into the door again, and I felt the whole frame shudder. I could not hold my breath any longer. Please. I will do anything. Just let me in. A sound cut through the storm, the sharp crack of splintering wood echoing in the hallway. The door shuddered again, but then the sound of sirens grew louder. Hope surged in my chest. Stay calm, the operator urged me. Help is almost there. Just hold on. I felt a rush of relief. I had to hold out just a little longer. The man at the door continued to pound against it, his desperation palpable. Let me in, he cried, but I stood my ground, ready to defend myself. And then, just as quickly as the pounding started, it stopped. I held my breath, the silence feeling heavy in the air. The operator asked, "Are you okay?" "Yes," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. But in that silence, I felt something shift. The man had gone quiet, and I peered out through the crack of the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I saw the shadows shifting outside, and for a moment, I thought he might have left. Then I heard the sound of footsteps retreating into the rain, and I held the knife tighter, ready for anything. Moments later, I heard the sound of sirens coming to a stop outside. My heart raced as I heard voices shouting, commands echoing in the storm. The door flew open, and I saw 2 police officers rush in, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "Where is he?" one of them shouted. I pointed toward the door, the weight of fear lifting slightly as I realized help had finally arrived. He was trying to get in. The officers moved quickly, scanning the area, their presence giving me a sense of safety. I followed them to the door, my heart racing, but no one was there. The rain continued to pour, soaking the ground outside, but the figure had vanished into the night. "Are you hurt?" one officer asked, concern on his face. I shook my head, still gripping the knife. "No," but I was so scared. The other officer radioed for backup while the first one stayed close to me. "You did the right thing by calling us," he said, his tone steady and reassuring. "You should never open the door to someone you do not know, especially in a storm like this." As the rain pounded against the roof, I could feel the adrenaline still pulsing through my veins. He looked desperate. I was worried something terrible was outside. "Did you see anyone else?" the officer asked, glancing outside. The storm made it hard to see anything beyond the reach of the flashlight beams. I shook my head again. "No, just him." He kept shouting that he needed to come in. "We'll check the perimeter of the house," the officer said, nodding to his partner. They moved cautiously toward the back door, flashlights sweeping over the yard, the light glimmering off the wet grass. I stood there, feeling exposed and fragile, even with them there. The other officer spoke into his radio, requesting additional units to help search the area. I could hear their voices crackling in my ear, but my focus remained on the door, my heart still racing with anxiety. The first officer returned, a look of concern on his face. "We don't see anyone outside, but we need to take your statement. Can you tell us everything that happened?" I took a deep breath, trying to collect my thoughts. I was just sitting here. I heard the knocking and then I paused, glancing at the door. It got worse. He was shouting and begging to come in. I didn't know what to do. Good instinct to call us. "Do you have any other family or friends nearby?" he asked. I shook my head. "I'm alone tonight." "All right, we'll make sure you are safe until we can locate this man," he said, giving me a reassuring smile. "You did everything right." While he spoke, I noticed the other officers still scanning the area outside. I could feel the tension beginning to ease slightly. Maybe the nightmare was over. Just then, a loud crash echoed from the back of the house, a sound that sent my heart racing anew. I glanced at the officers, who exchanged concerned looks before moving swiftly toward the noise. "Stay here," one of them commanded, their voices firm but not unkind. I nodded, gripping the knife tightly as they stepped out into the storm, their flashlights cutting through the sheets of rain. I waited, every second stretching into eternity. I felt alone again, despite the officer's presence just moments before. I listened intently, straining to hear any sign of what was happening outside. My mind raced with fear. What if he had come back? After what felt like an age, the officers returned, their expressions grave. "We found a broken window at the back," one said, glancing at his partner. It looks like someone has been trying to get in from both sides. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? We need to check the entire house. Stay where you are, the second officer said, and then they moved methodically through the house, flashlights illuminating each corner. Is he in here? I asked, my voice trembling. We will find out, the first officer assured me. Just keep calm. I watched as they swept through the living room, checking under furniture and in the closets. Every creak of the floorboards made my heart skip, every shadow felt alive. I held the knife close, the cool metal cold against my skin, a reminder that I still had some control. Then, as they moved toward the hallway, one officer called out, "We need to see the bathroom." I felt a wave of panic as they opened the door, revealing nothing but the empty space. They moved to the master bedroom, checking every inch, and I could feel the tension in the air. The rain continued to drum on the roof, the storm becoming a distant roar compared to the pounding of my heart. Finally, after what felt like hours, they emerged from the bedroom. "All clear," the first officer said, looking at me with a mixture of relief and concern. "It seems he is gone." I took a shaky breath, the weight of fear lifting just a little. "So, I am safe." "For now, yes," the officer replied. "But we will stay with you until the backup arrives." I nodded, grateful for their presence. As I sank onto the couch, the adrenaline slowly subsiding, I tried to process everything that had just happened. The rain continued its relentless assault against the windows, but now it felt almost soothing, like a lullaby. "Can I get you some water?" the officer asked, his voice a soft contrast to the chaos outside. "Yes, please." I stood, still shaky, and moved to the kitchen, my mind racing. I needed to calm down. I needed to breathe. While I filled a glass with water, I could feel the officer watching me, assessing my state. "You did really well tonight." It is not easy to stay calm in situations like this. "Thank you," I said, taking a sip and letting the coolness settle my nerves. Moments later, I heard the sound of sirens approaching again. Backup had arrived, and the feeling of safety washed over me. As more officers entered the house, their voices blending into the storm outside, I began to feel the weight of the situation lift. "Let's get a little more information from you," one officer said, pulling out a notepad. "We want to make sure this does not happen again." As I recounted the events of the evening, I felt the grip of fear loosening. I was not powerless. I had made it through the storm, and now, with their help, I would be safe. Later, as the officers prepared to leave, they assured me they would patrol the area and check back frequently. I felt a flicker of hope. I was not alone anymore. "Thank you for everything," I said, standing at the door as they prepared to leave. "Stay safe," one officer said, his eyes meeting mine with a firm understanding. As the door clicked shut and the last of the sirens faded into the distance, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. The storm raged on, but inside, I was finally at peace. I sank back onto the couch, the blanket wrapping around me once more, the flickering light of the television casting a warm glow in the room. I knew I would not forget this night, but I had survived. I had faced the storm, both outside and within. And in that moment, I felt ready to face whatever came next. The rain fell in thick sheets, drenching everything in its path. My partner and I had decided to go camping by the lake, hoping for a weekend away from the noise of the city. We had set up our tent just as the first droplets began to fall, not thinking much of the weather. We had camped many times before, and a little rain was no reason to change our plans. The sound of rain on the tent was soothing at first, a gentle rhythm that lulled me into a sense of comfort. We sat inside, sharing snacks and laughing, our voices barely rising above the patter of the rain. We had planned this trip for weeks, and I was determined to enjoy it, no matter the weather. As night fell, the rain intensified. The dark sky loomed above, heavy with clouds. The world outside felt like it was washing away. The only light came from a small lantern we had brought along, casting a warm glow inside the tent. We settled down for the night, my partner curling up next to me. Just as I began to drift off, I heard a sound that pulled me from sleep. At first, I thought it was just the rain, but then I heard it again, a soft murmur, like voices in the distance. I sat up, my heart racing. "Did you hear that?" I whispered, trying not to disturb my partner. They stirred but did not fully wake. They mumbled, half asleep. "There are voices outside," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I held my breath, straining to listen. The murmuring grew louder, voices mixing with the sound of rain. I could not make out the words, but there was something unsettling about the tone. It felt wrong. I gently shook my partner awake. "Wake up. I think someone is outside." They blinked, confusion in their eyes. "What?" "It's probably just the wind." "No, it's voices." "I am sure of it," I insisted. They sat up slowly, still groggy. I could see the concern creeping into their expression. We listened together, the rain creating a curtain of sound around us, but the voices became clearer. I could hear laughter, harsh and mocking, and I felt a chill creep down my spine. "What do you think they want?" my partner asked, their voice shaky. "I don't know, but we should stay quiet," I replied, panic rising in my chest. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as the voices grew closer, weaving through the rain like a sinister melody. Suddenly, I heard a rustle outside the tent, followed by a heavy thud. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Yes," my partner whispered back, their eyes wide. "What do we do?" "Let's stay quiet." "Maybe they will go away," I suggested, hoping my voice did not betray my fear. The laughter came again, closer now, and I could hear the sound of footsteps squelching in the mud outside. I felt a wave of dread wash over me as I crouched down, trying to make myself as small as possible. My heart raced, each beat a reminder of the danger lurking just outside our thin fabric walls. The voices grew louder, and I could make out snippets of conversation. "Look at this," one voice said, and I heard something metallic clatter to the ground. "Yeah, I bet they have something good in there," another replied, a laugh that made my skin crawl. "Let's see what they have." "They will not mind if we borrow a few things," a third voice said, filled with a malicious cheer. I exchanged a glance with my partner, the fear mirrored in their eyes. They nodded slightly, and I knew we had to do something. I could not just sit here while strangers rummaged through our things. "Do you think we should call for help?" my partner whispered, their voice trembling. "No! We cannot let them know we are awake. We need to figure out what they are doing first," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I had no idea who these people were or what they wanted, but I felt certain they were not here for friendly reasons. The sounds continued, the strangers moving about, throwing things around. I could hear our gear being jostled, the tent shaking slightly with their movements. I wanted to scream, to shout at them to leave, but I knew it would only make things worse. "Should we try to sneak out?" my partner suggested. "No! We need to wait until they leave. If we go up there now, we do not know how many there are or what they might do," I insisted. The minutes dragged on, feeling like hours. I could hear one of them say, "Hey, grab that flashlight," followed by more laughter. It was as if they were enjoying this, as if they had done it before and found it amusing. I could feel my partner's tension growing beside me. I put a hand on their arm, trying to offer some comfort, but it did little to ease the dread settling in my stomach. Then I heard the zipper of our tent begin to move. The sound froze me in place, my heart pounding in my chest. I held my breath, my mind racing. They were going to come in. I had to think fast. "We need to make a noise," I whispered to my partner. "Make it sound like we are still sleeping." They nodded, their eyes wide with fear. I took a deep breath and grabbed a small camping pot we had brought along. I banged it against the wall of the tent, making a loud clattering sound. "Hey!" "What was that?" one of the intruders shouted, the zipper freezing in place. I held my breath, praying it would work. "Did you hear that?" the second voice replied, their tone uncertain. "Maybe they are still in there," the third voice suggested, sounding less confident. I heard footsteps retreating, and I strained to listen. "Let's go," one of them said, their voice filled with irritation. "They are probably just scared. Let's find something else." I felt a wave of relief wash over me as the footsteps grew fainter, the voices fading into the rain. My partner and I exchanged a look, both of us breathing heavily, the adrenaline coursing through our veins. "Do you think they are really gone?" my partner asked, their voice barely above a whisper. "I do not know," I replied, feeling a mix of relief and dread. "But we cannot wait here. We need to get out of the tent and find help." With a shaky hand, I slowly unzipped the tent, peeking outside. The rain continued to fall, a steady curtain obscuring my view, but I saw no sign of the intruders. The campsite was eerily quiet now, the only sound being the soft patter of rain on the ground. "Let's go," I whispered, my heart racing. We crawled out of the tent, the cold rain hitting our skin as we stood in the dark. I could see our gear scattered around the campsite, and I felt a wave of anger rise up inside me. Those people had invaded our space, taken what did not belong to them. "Where do we go?" my partner asked, looking around, fear still etched on their face. "We need to get to the car and drive to the nearest ranger station." "Maybe they can help us," I replied, trying to sound calm. We moved quietly, staying low to the ground, our eyes scanning the area for any signs of movement. Every sound made us jump, the wind whispering through the trees, the rain soaking our clothes. We made it to the car, the familiar sight bringing a sense of hope. I fumbled for the keys, my hand shaking as I unlocked the doors. "Get in," I urged, and we both climbed inside, slamming the doors shut behind us. I turned the key in the ignition, relief flooding me when the engine roared to life. As I pulled out of the campsite, I glanced back, the tent now a shadow in the rain. I hoped those strangers had truly left. I had never felt such fear before, and the night felt like a nightmare I could not escape. Once we reached the ranger station, we explained everything to the staff, their faces growing serious as we recounted the events. They promised to send someone to check the area, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Afterward, we decided to head home, our camping trip cut short. As we drove away, I could not shake the feeling of dread that hung over me. I would never forget that night, the way the rain had concealed something dark and menacing. We made it home, and as I sat on my couch, staring at the darkened windows, I realized how quickly everything could change. The storm still raged outside, but now it was a comforting sound, a reminder of what I had escaped. I was safe, and I would never take that for granted again. The rain poured heavily that night, tapping against the windows like frantic fingers. I was curled up on the couch, a blanket wrapped tightly around me, trying to find comfort in the warm glow of the lamp. The weather had turned suddenly, dark clouds rolling in just as I had settled down with a book. Outside, the storm raged, but I felt safe inside my home. I had planned for a quiet evening, perhaps a movie or just some reading, but the howling wind and relentless rain made everything feel surreal. I lost track of time, the rhythmic sound of the rain almost lulling me to sleep. It was then that I heard it, a soft, piercing cry that cut through the sound of the storm. I sat up straight, my heart pounding. The cry came again, a child's voice rising above the rain. Confusion washed over me. What child would be out in this weather? I glanced at the clock. It was nearly 10. I should not open the door. Something felt off, but the cries continued, desperate and heart-wrenching. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling as I stood up. I walked to the door, the cries growing louder. "Is someone out there?" I hesitated for a moment, but I knew I could not ignore the voice. I opened the door slowly, my heart racing in my chest. The rain hit me like a wall, cold and biting. I squinted into the darkness, and that is when I saw her, a small girl, no more than 6 or 7, drenched and shivering, standing on my porch. "Please help me," she cried, her hair matted against her forehead, her clothes soaked through. "I am lost." My heart ached for her. I stepped outside, the rain soaking my own clothes. "Where are your parents?" I asked, crouching down to her level. "I don't know," she sobbed, her voice trembling. "I was playing outside, and then it started raining. I don't know where I am." Panic surged in me. I wanted to help her, but a small voice in the back of my mind warned me to be cautious. "Come inside, okay? We can call for help," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Okay," she whispered, and I reached out to take her hand. As I let her inside, I noticed her little fingers were ice cold. I shut the door quickly, locking it behind us. "Do you want some warm clothes?" I asked, my heart still pounding. "Yes, please," she said, her eyes wide and frightened. I rushed to grab a towel and some dry clothes from the closet. "You can wear this." "I will get you something warm to drink," I said, handing her the towel. I went to the kitchen, trying to calm my racing heart. I turned on the kettle and grabbed a cup, but as I stood there, I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. I returned to the living room to find her sitting on the couch, wrapped in the towel, her small frame shivering. "What is your name?" I asked, kneeling beside her. "Emily," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emily, where do you live?" I inquired, trying to piece together what had happened. "I was at the park with my parents," she replied, her eyes darting around the room. "Then I got lost." "Okay, Emily. I will call your parents." "I promise you will be okay," I said, hoping my voice was reassuring. Just then, the sound of a loud bang echoed from outside, followed by shouting. My heart dropped. I felt a chill creep up my spine as I turned to look out the window. The rain continued to pour, but I could see shadows moving outside. "Emily, stay here," I said urgently, stepping back toward the door. I grabbed my phone and dialed the police, my hands shaking. 911, what is your emergency?" the operator answered. "There is a child at my house. She says she is lost, and I can hear shouting outside." "I think someone is looking for her," I said, my voice trembling. "Please stay on the line." "Can you see who is outside?" the operator asked. "No, but there are voices, angry voices." "I do not feel safe," I replied, my heart racing. As I spoke, the banging on the door grew louder. My heart dropped as I turned toward the sound. "Please, let us in," a voice shouted from outside, low and menacing. "Who is that?" I asked the operator, panic flooding my veins. Do not open the door, the operator warned, but it was too late. I had already moved toward the door. Emily, stay back, I whispered, but my voice was lost in the chaos. The banging continued, and the voice grew more insistent. We know she is in there. Open up. I could hear Emily whimper behind me, fear radiating from her small body. I pressed my back against the door, gripping the knob tightly, heart pounding in my chest. What do you want? I shouted, my voice shaking. We are her parents, the voice called, but something in the tone felt wrong. You need to let us in. She is scared. No! I will not let you in. I shouted back, my voice rising in desperation. The shouting intensified, anger lacing their words. You are keeping her from us. Open the door, or we will break it down. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed outside, and I felt my stomach drop. I could not let them in. I turned back to Emily, her eyes white with fear. We need to hide, I whispered urgently. Where? She asked, tears streaming down her cheeks. Come on, I said, leading her down the hallway to the bathroom. I pushed the door shut and crouched down beside her, my heart racing. We will stay here until they leave. Outside, the banging continued, louder now. The sound of wood splintering echoed through the house, and I held my breath, hoping the door would hold. Just stay quiet, I whispered to Emily, who nodded, her tiny body trembling against mine. The door finally gave way with a loud crash, and I could hear the intruders shouting, their voices growing louder as they stormed into my home. I squeezed Emily's hand tightly, my heart pounding in my chest. Where are you? One of the voices called, and I could hear footsteps moving through the house, searching. She has to be here somewhere. I wanted to scream, to shout that we were right here, but I knew better. I forced myself to stay quiet, my mind racing. What were they planning to do if they found us? The footsteps moved closer, and I felt tears prick at my eyes. I could not let them find us. I held Emily close, hoping that we would be safe in the small space. Suddenly, I heard a voice from the living room, one that sounded more authoritative. What is going on in here? A man shouted, and I felt a flicker of hope. Did you find her? The first voice replied, panic lacing his tone. No. Check the back rooms, the man ordered, his voice firm. The footsteps continued, and I pressed my back against the wall, praying they would not come any closer. We will be okay, I whispered to Emily, who was trembling against me. Moments later, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance, growing louder. The intruders began to argue, their voices rising in anger. We need to get out of here, one shouted. Not without her, the other insisted. But as the sirens grew closer, I could hear the panic in their voices. They are coming. We have to go. The footsteps retreated, and I felt a rush of relief wash over me. I listened as they crashed out the front door, leaving behind chaos and confusion. Stay here, I whispered to Emily, easing the door open just a crack. I peered outside, heart racing. The front door was wide open, the rain spilling into the house. I could hear the sound of police cars pulling up outside, their lights flashing through the windows. They are here, I said, my voice trembling. It is okay. We are safe now. With cautious steps, I led Emily back into the living room, where two police officers were already moving through the house. Are you all right? One of them asked, concern etched on his face. Yes, but the people who were here, they were not her real parents, I said, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. The officer nodded, his face grim. We will take care of it from here. You did the right thing by calling us. I watched as they began searching the area, and I felt a sense of safety wrap around me. Emily clung to my side, her small hand gripping mine tightly. "Everything will be okay," I said, kneeling down to her level. "You are safe now." As the officers continued to work, I knew that I had made the right decision by opening the door. Even in the midst of fear, I had chosen to help. The storm outside raged on, but inside, I felt a sense of peace settling over me.